Alice scrutinized the woman's face on the laptop screen. It so happened that the search engine accidentally gave her an article about this Catherine, the founder of a charitable foundation to help babies in difficult situations, left without parents or raising themselves in very poor families. A mature, well-groomed woman, kind look, open smile, stylish, so energetic. Alice could not take her eyes off her face. She kept staring, whether she remembered her or not. It looked like she did, but she couldn't be sure. After all, Alice had seen her only once in her life almost 15 years ago. And yet some gut feeling told her it was the woman who had once played such a big role in the fate of their family. What would have happened to them all if it hadn't been for Catherine? Or was it not her after all? Alice once again looked at the article. It talked about Catherine's life. She was quite happy now, as she had finally found her true calling. The woman helps children and considers it her life's work. Catherine even took in 3 babies from the orphanage. The kind that everyone refused. There were health and behavioral problems, but now they were well-adjusted teenagers. 2 girls and a boy. They posed for pictures with their foster mom. Beautiful, dressed up, smiling. And just 10 years ago, no one would have given them a chance. Catherine proved by her own example that the impossible is possible. The main thing is love, faith in children, a willingness to work long and hard. Not everyone is capable of this. Of course, Catherine is rich. Her husband is a big businessman, owner of a famous chain of gas stations. And she's accomplished a lot herself. For many years, she worked as a stockbroker and managed to make a fortune. In an interview, Catherine admitted that she used to consider career as the main thing in her life, and money was not even the main motivator. No, Catherine grew up in a fairly wealthy family and never knew the need. It's just that her work fascinated her, thrilled her, completely inspired her, was a kind of interesting game to which the woman gave herself completely, and then everything changed. Catherine was then already about 40. She started thinking about having kids. That's when it became clear that it wasn't that simple. Alice read this article on the internet like a fascinating book, holding her breath. According to everything, it appeared that the guardian angel and savior of their family just is this very Catherine. Everything was coming together with surprising accuracy. Alice pulled herself away from the screen, leaned back in her chair, and sighed heavily. The memories, they were punishing her in slow waves. Heavy memories of the past. She had been on the verge of despair then. Alice couldn't cope with the hardships heaped upon her. It seemed that nothing more good was ahead of her. The darkness, the poverty of survival. Alice, then still very young and inexperienced, did not want to wake up in the morning because what good could another day bring her? A terrible condition. She had never experienced anything like it before or since. Alice hadn't had a very good life. She was born into a very poor family. Her mother worked as a janitor, her father worked wherever he could. Both of them were uneducated people, finished 9 grades and did not go anywhere to study further. Then somehow they met and started living together. As far as Alice knew, her parents were not even married. The 3 of them lived in an old wooden building on the outskirts of town, in a former barrack. The family had a small apartment there, or rather they rented it with their corner. Alice's father and mother never got one. Both were quite satisfied with such a life. If one of the spouses managed to earn more, arranged a holiday with drinking, cheerful neighbors, dancing, talking until morning, and sometimes fights. Alice on such days bought cheap sweets from the nearest store, stale gingerbread, chocolates with nuts, soda in tin cans. The little girl felt almost happy, but the truth is, fear always came afterward. Having drunkenly visited parents, many of them instilled fear in Alice. Sometimes she even did not sleep for nights on end, listening to the sounds in the kitchen. Up to a time, the girl believed that everyone lived like her. Alice did not go to kindergarten. Since those years, she stayed home alone while her parents worked or went for a walk somewhere. She even liked it. She could play wherever she wanted and make as much noise as she wanted. No one reprimanded her or calmed her down. Alice had a lot of friends in the yard. The girl knew them from birth. These were the children of those very neighbors with whom her parents were so closely communicated. These boys and girls grew up just like Alice herself. The neighborhood was so dysfunctional, everyone lived like that. And then it was time to go to school. And it was there that Alice realized how different her own life was from the lives of many other children. Her classmates had beautiful new briefcases and clean clothes. They brought beautiful toys to school, discussed computer games and trips to the sea. Alice, it was like she was in another world. The children at first tried to stay away from Alice. An unkempt girl in a scarlet dress with a golden orange over-the-shoulder briefcase, inherited from someone in the neighborhood. The little girl was very out of the general mass, and Alice herself was in no hurry to get close to her classmates, who were like aliens to her. But Alice looked closely at these girls and boys. She understood a lot of things in this life, looking at them, and tried very hard to fit into this alien, but so attractive world. Alice learned to keep her things in her workplace in order. Around her small desk, chaos could reign. There were empty bottles, some rags, garbage, but the desk itself was perfectly clean. The girl began to ask her parents for new things, albeit cheap, but from the store, not from someone else's shoulder. Sometimes she even managed to persuade her parents to buy. And Alice also tried very hard to study well. True, with this was trouble. The girl often crammed all the rules from the textbook and memorized formulas, but still made mistakes in words and examples. And physics and chemistry remained for her incomprehensible subjects. Alice was upset, but she did not give up. She crammed, studied and studied. Teachers saw it and praised her for her diligence. Even grades hard-working Alice overestimated, encouraged as they could. But Alice knew that she would not make a scientist out of her, and so would like to become an economist or lawyer, to work in the office, to walk in a beautiful blouse and a narrow skirt, and be sure to wear high-heeled shoes. But the girl was very mature for her age and really looked at things. She knew that to the university is clearly not up to the university, but the secondary specialized education will definitely get. Teachers helped a conscientious student, drew her a good certificate. Thanks to this, Alice entered the college on confectioner. The profession seemed to her suitable, in demand, useful. You will never go hungry approved the choice of her daughter's mother. Her father was gone by then. Died a year earlier, poisoned by poor quality booze. The mother, by the way, too, also briefly stayed on this world after the spouse. When Alice was studying at the second year, the mother, drunk, fell asleep in the cold outside and never woke up again, frozen. Alice that night was preparing for exams because in the middle of the winter session, and did not even suspect anything. She thought that her mother, as always, would stay the night where she was walking. But she decided to come home. So the very young Alice was left alone in the world. She was barely 18 at the time. At least she had time to become an adult, otherwise she would have had to go to an orphanage. Alice suffered the death of her parents, no matter how they were, but still loved her, and in their own way took care of her daughter, never beat, never humiliated. And the fact that somewhere were too indifferent, so they themselves had such a childhood. No one taught them how to bring up children. But life itself didn't let the girl worry for long. She now had to think about how to provide for herself. No, Alice has long been working a little bit by little bit. That floors, instead of her mother or her shift washed, or substituted saleswoman in the local store for a few hours. But now Alice needed a lot more money, because the rent to pay for housing, and to go to college every day on the bus and eat at least something. So Alice got a job as an assistant in the school canteen. The work was hard in every sense of the word. All day long she had to move heavy pots from place to place. After the shift, Alice felt very tired. And what kind of study is there? Of course, the girl could not combine work and college. She was soon expelled. Alice cried then from despair, injustice and inability to change anything. Wow, she tried so hard to make it in the world and still repeats the fate of her parents. Also left without education. But Alice will definitely not drink, and she will have her own family with a caring, hard-working husband who will definitely take care of her. Maybe she will have time to finish her studies later. Who knows how life will turn out? Alice dreamed of having a family. She was tired of living alone. She wanted to have a reliable person to rely on. But the local guys were definitely not suitable for the role of a life partner. They were firmly and confidently following in their parents' footsteps. It was very noticeable. Looking at the guys and girls Alice grew up with, I wondered if they didn't realize that they had to get away from such a fate, at least try to fix something. But they didn't seem to see anything special in their way of life. Everything suited them. They felt quite happy, got together, had children and split up, had fun parties with fighting and long heartfelt conversations about nothing. Just like their parents. Once Alice was also called, but she always refused. What did she get a reputation for? Signs. Have you lost your temper? You look down on everyone. You've stopped talking to our people altogether, said Sandy, a neighbor girl and once Alice's closest friend. Sandy didn't work. Why should she? She already had a young son, for whom she got a pretty good child support. I wish she could get child support from the baby's father. But the problem was, he didn't work. Sandy often invited Alice to visit. The girl refused. She knew exactly what was going on behind the doors and windows of the apartment. The same things that had happened in her own home. Walks with heartfelt, meaningless conversations and muzzling. Sometimes Alice wondered, I wonder why she turned out like that. Different. Perhaps it would have been much easier for her if she had turned out like everyone else. But no, Alice was striving for something else. She understood perfectly well she had to move somewhere first, otherwise she wouldn't be able to get out of this swamp. But she was desperately short of money. And then Alice met Alex by chance. The girl was returning from another shift, tired, could hardly move her legs. She sat down to rest on a bench, bought an ice cream. She spent the whole day in the canteen. It's so hot in there. I wanted to cool down at least a little. It was the middle of May. It was already summer weather. It was quiet, calm and beautiful in the park. Dressed up people were walking along the paths. Pleasant music was coming from the speakers on the pole. I didn't want to go home to my barracks. There again behind the wall partying. All around there is hopeless poverty. These people who walk here in the park, they probably don't even know about that other world. They think it's just as beautiful and clean everywhere else. Happy. Why be sad? And a young man sat on a bench. He's so nice. Open smile, kind dark eyes, charming dimples on his cheeks, brown hair. I'm walking along the park, not touching anyone, and then suddenly such an amazing phenomenon. A beautiful girl on a bench, one very beautiful and very sad. It's not right, Alice smiled. A cute guy had called her beautiful. Great. Even goosebumps ran down her back. Not at all like the typical compliments of Alice's neighbors. But what kind of beautiful is she? She's just ordinary. What's he doing here? Alex the stranger introduced himself. And may I know your name? I don't mean to be impudent or intrusive, just to address you in some way. You don't mind, do you? Alice the girl smiled a little embarrassed. She wondered what would happen next. This Alex he did not repel, did not strain, on the contrary, somehow very disposable. His smile was warm, kind, sincere. They sat on that bench for a long time, talking about everything in the world, telling each other about themselves and gradually getting closer, becoming almost kin. Alex, too, had already been left without parents. He was brought up by his aunt, his maternal sister. The boy didn't know his father, and his mother had left him when the boy was barely 5 years old. A young woman's heart failed her, so little Alex ended up at his aunt's house, and she was not too happy about the extra mouth. She didn't kick him out of the house, but she could not surround her nephew with love and care. Alex treated this fact with understanding and was grateful to his aunt for not sending him to an orphanage after all. Some kind of kinship, but kin, reasoned the guy, everything is better than among strangers, to grow up. I guess so, Alice shook her head. Perhaps Alexia was right, but still some too indifferent and aloof was his aunt. Her, Alice's mother and father loved her in their own way, took care of their daughter as best they could. And Alex, it turns out, did not know parental affection and love at all. After the 9th grade, Alex entered the technical school and began to study to be a welder, but never finished his studies because he had to work. Feeding an 18-year-old boy, the aunt was not going to. I raised you to adulthood. I've done my duty, this strict woman said on her nephew's birthday. Now be good. Start your own life. It's time for you to move out. So the guy had to hurriedly finish the driver's course and get a job at the base of the factory. Alice even aghast when she heard this. How similar to her own story. She couldn't finish her studies either. That was the reason why she had to support herself. She was just a little bit away from graduation, but she had to get a job immediately. "Well, I'm grateful to my aunt for doing that," Alex smiled. "But I'm only 20 now, and I'm already a fully independent person. My peers still sit on their parents' necks, and I am my own master." Alex rented an apartment in a good neighborhood, and he managed to find a great job. He drove the head of a big factory. The salary was very good. It was enough to live on, and even for fun. Since that memorable evening, Alex and Alice never parted again. At first they met, went on dates. The guy always invented something new. That they walked around the old city center, looking at unusual buildings, that in a cafe sat establishments, the existence of which the girl did not even suspect, or something else. And after a month, Alex offered Alice to move in with him. She gladly agreed. Why, it was even more profitable to rent one apartment instead of two. Besides, the girl had long dreamed of leaving her barracks. Alex turned out to be kind, caring, sensitive. Alice had always dreamed of such a man next to her. He knew how to cook, make repairs, handle money, responsible and economical. Most importantly, he loved Alice very much. The girl felt it. Of course, she also loved Alex. And young people felt then really happy. There were so many good things ahead. It seemed to both of them that they would surely succeed together. It was not by chance that fate brought together two people with such similar stories and similar views on life. Alex worked as a driver. Alice continued to work in the school canteen. Now she would come home, gladly buy something tasty on the way to make her favorite dinner, and wait for him from work. They married a month after they started living together. That's how quickly things developed. They didn't have a big wedding. What's the point? There was no extra money, and there were no relatives who needed all this solemnity. It was better to buy something for the house. We celebrated together in a restaurant. We had a hearty meal. Alex then looked at Alice with serious eyes and said that he would do everything for the sake of their family. "We will be happy, we will have children, and they will also be happy for us. I will roll mountains." And Alex really tried to fulfill this promise. He worked hard. He was given bonuses, which he put aside for an account for future housing. The couple had a common dream to get their own apartment, and they were on their way to it. Both, of course, realized that the fulfillment of this desire is still far away. But nothing is not all at once, little by little. With children, Alex and Alice decided not to hurry yet. Both thought that first you need to earn your own corner. The couple wanted their baby to have a happy, carefree childhood, not like theirs. But fate, as it seems, has a plan for everything. One day Alice realized she was expecting a baby. She had a kind of epiphany one morning. It was still early to suspect something, but Alice was suddenly literally pierced by the thought. Inside her already lives and develops a baby. At first Alice waved off these speculations, then still made a test, 2 stripes. There can be no doubt. Well, the future mother was almost not surprised. She felt everything. At the time, Alice had no idea. Could not even imagine that at the same time rejoicing in a positive test. And a complete stranger to her woman, who very soon would play a huge role in the life of their young family. Alex rejoiced, having learned the news, picked up the young spouse in his arms, circling the room. From the excess of feelings, the future father hugged his beloved so tightly that it was even difficult for her to breathe. "Wow. I was afraid to tell you. I thought you would be upset," smiled Alice, looking at the shining spouse. Why is that he was surprised? "Well, we wanted our own apartment first, to stand on our own feet, and then we wanted it." Alec agreed. "We planned it differently, but for some reason I'm incredibly happy. This is the best news I've ever gotten in my entire life." Alice smiled. Alex was so good. She was only now slowly getting used to having such a person next to her. The best, the nicest one on the whole planet. And he loves her. What happiness it is. The young couple began to prepare for the arrival of an heir. Alice was transferred to a lighter job. The pans that she could not carry now, her salary decreased. But Alex began to take part-time jobs. During the day he drove his boss around, and in the evenings he delivered materials to the sites by truck. He worked as hard as he could to raise more money for the birth of the baby. "Our child should have everything necessary and even more," Alex said, hugging Alice in the evening after work. Alice felt sorry for her husband. She saw how tired he was. But what to do? Her husband is right. They really have no one to help them. They have to achieve everything themselves. And it's not easy. Then came the long-awaited maternity leave. Alice felt not very well and was glad to be able to at least a little rest before the appearance of her favorite daughter. Ultrasound had already shown that it would be a girl. The spouses even decided on the name. Alex said that he wanted to call his daughter Susie. Alice did not object. She also liked the name Warm, so sweet. It was a late September evening. There was no sign of trouble. Alex went to his part-time job to move furniture from one city to another. He was still glad of the opportunity to bring an extra penny into the house, which of course was not at all superfluous in fact. The weather was good. The highway was quiet. Alex was an experienced driver, despite his young age. Alice often worried when her husband made long-distance transportation. But that evening she wasn't anxious at all. Alice was lying on the couch with her laptop and choosing things for the baby for the discharge. Yes, it's still a couple months away. But while you order, while the parcel will be delivered, a lot of time will pass. Alice smiled at the tiny overalls and cradles. Of course, the dresses were especially adorable. It turns out that on newborns open even luxurious evening toilets. It was so nice to imagine my little girl in these clothes. I wonder who little Susie will look like. We know it won't be for another 2 months. She and Alex are both cute. Susie's going to be a beauty either way. But that's not even the point, as long as she's big. And then that phone call came. Alice immediately felt something. She didn't feel like picking up the phone. A call in the evening and from an unknown number. It's not good, but there was no way out. Tim's excited voice came through the phone. The girl recognized him immediately. It was Alex's partner, his colleague. The man's tone was suggestive of apprehension. Alice, trouble. Alex has crashed. How? Alice exhaled. She felt a sudden twinge of something in her stomach. He lost control on the highway and went into a ditch. They took him to the hospital. Is he even alive? I don't know anything. It was a terrible accident. I happened to be passing by, saw a familiar truck, and then it happened right in front of me. Go to the hospital or call to find out. They took him there. I had time to ask the doctors. Alice hastily changed her clothes and ran out of the house. Her temples throbbed, her legs were still moving, her heart clenched with an icy hand. Anxiety. Only if I were alive, only if I were alive. She herself did not notice how she whispered these words. Without thinking about safety, Alice stopped a hitchhiker. There was a guy behind the wheel. He looked anxiously at the pregnant young woman with terror-crazed eyes. Do you need help? He asked. Is it time to go to the hospital? No. To the hospital, Alice asked for a ride. Yes, of course. The young man didn't ask any unnecessary questions, and he didn't take any money for the ride either. It was obvious that the guy sympathized and empathized with the passenger, but he didn't want to pry into her soul. However, he asked her a couple of times if she needed help. Alice said no. How could this young man help her? The young man drove her to the hospital gate, wished her good luck and left. Alice rushed to the registrar's office to find out where her husband was and what was wrong with him. She had to run for a long time between the buildings of the big hospital. No one knew anything. She was kicked from one department to another like a soccer ball. Alice couldn't find any peace at all until she finally found the information she needed. He's being operated on right now, the girl at the front desk replied. Alice exhaled with relief. In a serious condition, but he was alive, so the doctors had managed to get him to the hospital. Now everything is in the hands of surgeons. What about him? What kind of injuries? And who are you? Wife Alice answered and mentally reproached herself for not having thought to bring her passport. But she had run out of the house in such a state that she had no time for that. Fortunately, the documents were not needed. The girl at the reception desk took her at her word. Wait for the end of the operation. The surgeons will contact you afterward. Just leave your phone number. Can I wait here? What's the point? Surgery can go on for hours on end, and it's too late. When you get home in your condition, you need to rest. You can't help your husband here anyway. And yet Alice stayed in the hospital until the end of the operation. She sat on the couch at the door of the surgical ward, praying to herself. She had never done this before and didn't even think she knew how to do it. And now the words were coming out of her subconscious. Alex must survive. She had to. How would she be without him? The girl at the front desk came up to her several times, bringing her water, cookies. At first she seemed so strict, so indifferent, but then she showed herself a sensitive and attentive person. She looked at Alice with regret and said encouraging words, even hugged her a couple of times. This support made it a little easier. The operation took a long time. It ended in the morning. Alice did not sleep a wink during all this time. How can you sleep when your heart is clenched with fear for your loved one? Finally, a tired surgeon came out into the corridor. Alice, dying of fear, scrutinized his face, trying to understand what news he was about to tell her. The injuries are serious. We had to fight for your husband's life. Pulled him, you might say, from the other side of the world. Now it's up to the body to cope or not. In any case, a few days will be critical. If he survives, he will have a long and difficult recovery. Alice nodded her head. At this moment, she was not thinking about the upcoming difficulties. The main thing was for Alex to survive. The surgeon was giving details about Alex's injuries. His situation was indeed very difficult. Why is he so driven? The doctor sighed sadly at the end of his monologue. He was so strong, handsome, strong. Now, at best he will become an invalid, and that is if he survives. Young people, do not think with your head. Alice sighed. She couldn't explain to this man in 2 words that Alex had worked hard for their child. He worked several shifts, grabbed any job. So he'd driven himself to the brink. I'm sure Alex lost his guard on the highway because he was tired. That's why he flew into that ditch. Alice went out on the porch of the hospital. It was light out. She called a cab. Good thing she hadn't forgotten her cell phone at home, though she could have in her condition. Then the phone vibrated again. Who would be calling this early? The man Alex worked for last night. I know what happened, he said. I understand your husband is in the hospital. He's alive, I'm told, which is good. But you have to understand. My truck is beyond repair. The furniture's ruined too. Your husband is contractually liable, so please reimburse me for this amount. Let it not be at once. Let it be in installments. Yes, of course, Alice said into the receiver and pressed reset. Only now she thought of other problems. Money. Alex was the main earner in their family. He paid the rent and bought groceries. Alice's earnings were barely enough not to starve to death. Everything else was on Alex's strong and so reliable shoulders. And now what? Catastrophe. Where to get money for food and rent. And you're probably going to need medicine too. Alex has to be treated, rehabilitated. Where are we going to get the money? The debt must be a fortune. A truck, furniture. What about them? They don't even have anything to sell. And Susie's about to be born. Tears spurted from Alice's voice. She sank helplessly to the steps of the hospital porch. And then, immediately her stomach was pierced by a searing pain so sharp that Alice's eyes even went black. Then it seemed to let go, but after a moment everything repeated again. Alice wrapped her arms around her stomach and collapsed on the porch. The pain came in waves. Alice couldn't think about Alex anymore, or the money problems their family was facing. Everything became unimportant, as long as this hellish pain went away. Alice called for help with all her might. People in white coats on a gurney, the bright light of the lamp in the operating room. Alice was asked some questions. She answered, sometimes in an offhand manner. And then someone put a mask on her face and asked her to count from 10 to 1. Alice concentrated and started counting. Soon there was blissful darkness and calmness came. Alice felt that she was floating in something soft and gentle. Most importantly, the excruciating pain was gone. No thoughts, worries, fears. Only silence and peace. Alice was even a little upset when she opened her eyes and found herself in a bright hospital room. Her mouth was terribly dry. Her tongue felt like it was glued to her palate. Unpleasant sensations. Alice was lying under an IV. Some wires were attached to her chest. The girl felt a strange lightness in her whole body. She grabbed her stomach. There was no stomach. How was this possible? Alice had a cold sweat on her forehead from fear and anxiety. "Hello, anyone?" Alice shouted with all her might, but her voice sounded quiet, barely audible. True, the patient was noticed. At her call, a woman in a white coat, either a doctor or a nurse, entered the room. "Where is my baby?" Alice asked the question, on the answer to which depended her whole life. She had never been so scared before. "Your baby girl is in the room for premature babies. She's alive," the hospital employee hurried to reassure the patient. "You went into premature labor on nervous grounds. It's good that you were in the hospital at the time." They were quick to help. "Is she alive?" Alice clarified again. "Yes, she's alive. Good girl, strong, but she needs to be raised in a cuvette. Premature, after all. I've seen a lot of babies like that. This one will be fine. No, she needs rehab, of course, not without it. But the baby is not critical, don't worry." Alice nodded her head gratefully. The main thing was that Susie was alive. The young mother immediately believed the words of the woman in the white coat. Her daughter was really going to be all right. Ironically, the woman who would later save Alice and Alexei also had a baby born that day, and also premature. But unlike Alice, she had heard a very different prognosis from the doctors. Her baby was given no chance. Can I see my daughter?" "That's for later. Right now, you're too weak yourself. You've lost a lot of blood. And anyway, we all know what happened to your husband. Of course, you're nervous that you gave birth prematurely. And my husband you don't know. Is there any news about him?" "I know he's alive. He's in intensive care now. Nothing else." And anxious days flowed, filled with fear for her daughter and husband, injections, pills, painful procedures. Alice felt her strength returning to her. It was good because she would need her strength. Now she will have on her hands a disabled husband and a newborn daughter requiring intensive care. After all, no one canceled the money problem. Will Alice be able to cope with all this alone? The nursing staff, knowing the story of the young mom, tried to support her in any way they could. They told her every day about Alex's condition. The man had already been moved out of intensive care. He even began to move his arms to speak and learn to sit up. But walking was much worse. All indications were that Alex would never get out of his wheelchair. Susie. Things were really good. She was growing, getting stronger, and, most importantly, gaining weight. Alice was walked to her daughter on the third day after the baby girl was born. Susie lay in her ditch, so small, so defenseless. Her tiny body was tangled with wires. And yet against her own, the little girl looked the strongest. Nearby were babies born much earlier than they should have been. Susie still spent 7 months in her mother's womb. Soon Alice was discharged from the hospital, but the woman still came here every day to visit Susie and Alex and to check on their condition with the doctors. Alex is a brave man. It hurt to see her young and once strong husband in a wheelchair, but he assured me he would soon recover and get back to work with renewed vigor. Because no more idleness. Alex looked at Susie's pictures with a snowy smile. He wished he could get back on his feet soon and see his daughter, he dreamed. "I'll carry her on my shoulders through the park, learn to braid her pigtails." Alice smiled sadly. Judging by what the attending doctor had told her, Alex was unlikely to get up. There was a chance, but rehabilitation required a lot of money. Where would they get the money? Thanks to the doctors, they helped to quickly formalize Alex's disability, which meant social payments and at least some free medical services. Only all this is not enough, negligible for full recovery of the lay. And then the owner of the truck called every day and demanded money. The woman even had to go to work. Now she washed the entrances in the mornings and evenings. No matter what, it was money. She had plenty of time for now. Susie was in the hospital. Another month or so passed, and then Alex was released from the hospital. He came home in a wheelchair. It was good that they had ramps in their entrance, but there was enough inconvenience. Yes, it was hard for Alex to get used to his new reality. But he was not discouraged and supported Alice and looked for a job. He thoroughly studied the internet in search of earnings for people who cannot walk. There were very few vacancies, and finally Susie was discharged. The joy of the young parents was unprecedented, despite the seemingly hopeless situation. Alex quickly learned all the manipulations: bathing, feeding, and changing diapers. Seeing that the young father was doing quite well, Alice decided to go out to work. "We don't have enough money, and you can still cope with the baby at home. I'll go back to the canteen. There is no other way out." Alex had to agree. I could personally see that it was very hard on him. To be the main breadwinner for so long, and now to sit on his wife's neck. But the young family really had no way out. They had to pay for housing, food, pay off their debts. The money that Alex had been saving for the future housing for a couple of years had gone at a cosmic speed. Some of it went to medicine, some to pay off the cost of the truck. It was a difficult time. Alyssa was at work 24 hours a day. She worked double shifts. Alex did the best he could at home. Susie grew up sickly, the effects of prematurity. She needed medicines, expensive vitamins, endless consultations and examinations of specialists. Alice was very tired. Alex, too, looked like a lemon. He took part-time jobs, earned pennies, but he could not sit idle either. Susie was completely on him. Only the head of the family thought it wasn't enough. And still the money was woefully inadequate. Even a stroller for Susie was not on what to buy, and it was very necessary at least to take the girl to the clinic. One evening Alice was coming home from work. Already her back and legs ached from fatigue. Heavy thoughts were born in her head. This was not how Alice imagined family life. In her dreams she saw herself strolling through the park with a stroller in which lay a smart baby. Alice often saw off such young mothers. They walk calm, peaceful, happy, and do not even realize how lucky they are. Lucky that they can walk freely with their babies and devote all their time to them. And there's Susie, she doesn't even have a stroller. Suddenly Alice's attention was attracted by a woman walking towards her with a stroller, a lovely stroller in a fashionable coffee color. Comfortable maneuverability, clearly a very expensive and high-quality thing. Alice had seen them in children's stores. They cost a fortune. Alice habitually escorted the woman with a glance. Something stranger attracted her, so stylish, well-groomed. Aged, of course, but now many people give birth to their first child, especially for the rich. It's fashionable. But why is this woman so sad? Maybe something happened in her life? Something terrible must have happened to her. There's no other way to explain that look in her eyes. After all, she seems to be doing well, so beautiful, rolling an expensive stroller in front of her. In it probably lies a baby dressed in brand-name clothes. The woman rolled the stroller to the parking lot with garbage cans. The garbage hadn't been picked up in a long time. There was a sort of spontaneous dumping ground. Alice thought that perhaps the woman would throw away the bag of garbage and move on. But the stranger did otherwise. She sighed, rocked the stroller a few times, and walked away. With a quick step, this woman walked behind the house, somewhere far away, and the stroller remained in place. Alice couldn't believe her eyes, hurried to the garbage cans. The first thing she did was look in the stroller. There was no one there. Alice exhaled. She had already decided that some crazy person had thrown the baby into the trash. Such cases are sometimes described on the internet, but the stroller, fortunately, was empty. Why would a stranger leave it here? Dumped it? Probably. People sometimes leave good things near the trash for people in need to pick up. So this woman, her baby, must have grown up by now. So she got rid of a stroller she didn't need. Yes, that was the most reasonable explanation. But Alice tried not to rejoice just yet. What if the woman came back now? What if she'd just left the stroller here while she went to run errands or pick up the baby? Strange choice. A place, sure, but not much of a place. Half an hour passed. The woman still hadn't shown up. Alice had been guarding the stroller the whole time, because, well, what if someone else took it? Such a thing does not stand near garbage cans. They need the stroller for Susie. They need it. In the end, Alice was sure that the mistress did not need the stroller, and with a calm soul rolled it to her house. Alex, having seen the stroller, even whistled with surprise. That's how our Susie has transportation. An elite vehicle. I'm surprised myself, smiled Alice. The woman right in front of my eyes left it on the trash and left. I waited for a long time in case she came back. But no, she didn't. It's strange. It's such a beautiful stroller, obviously expensive. I could have sold it. I'd make a lot of money. It's in perfect condition, like new. Strange indeed, as good as new, agreed Alice. It must have been used very carefully, or not used at all. Alex shook his head, examining the tires carefully. But come on. They, the rich, do not understand. Leszka volunteered to wash the stroller himself. That's why he found the letter. A sheet of paper folded in half was in the side pocket of the stroller. It was a whole message. "Come here," Alex called to his wife. She was playing with Susie at that moment. "This, I just can't believe it." Read it. The guy handed the sheet to his wife. "Where did you get this?" "It was in the stroller." "I don't know how to react to this. It's a terrific letter." Alice took the sheet of paper from her husband's hands and began to read. Beautiful, almost polygraphic handwriting, easy syllable. It was clearly written by a very literate person. And the meaning? Yes, Alex is right. It's a really unbelievable story. "Hello, people who found this letter," that's how the message began. "If you're reading this, it means the stroller has finally met its little master or mistress. That's just wonderful. My name is Catherine. I decided to leave the stroller exactly near the garbage cans so that it would go to needy people with a baby who have no money at all for children's transportation. May the stroller last a long time and help you raise your child. No doubt you are low-income people, even perhaps living on the edge of poverty. Different situations can happen. Why am I so sure of this? So simply because hardly anyone from a wealthy family will pick up a stroller at the dump. Such people prepare for the arrival of a child in advance, make lists, choose things in children's stores. I'm just as happy and was just a little while ago. But you are happy, even happier than I am, because you have the main thing, your child, your son or daughter. It is happiness to be parents, to see your baby grow, to give him love, to introduce him to the world. I don't know what could be better than that. Probably nothing. So you're much happier than I am. You're going through a hard time right now, but I'm sure you'll get through it. Everything's going to be okay in the end. Let this wheelchair be a help to you on your start to success." "It's like she's describing us," Alice said in amazement, looking at Alex. "Exactly," agreed her spouse. "That's what's so amazing about it." "Well, you go ahead and read on. There's a lot of interesting stuff in there, especially at the end." Alice delved into the reading again. "My life has been a fairy tale in which all my wishes were fulfilled. Since childhood, I have never been denied anything. My father is a successful businessman. My mother a successful financier. I was the only granddaughter of my mom and dad's grandparents. You can imagine how they spoiled me, how much love, care, and attention I received. They invested a lot in me, and I knew that the moment would come and I would pass it all on to my children. I dreamed of a big family since I was little, and in games with my girlfriends I always took on the role of a mother with many children. Since childhood I heard from everyone that I will be a great mother when the time comes. So I grew up with that thought. And then I grew up. It turned out that life is very colorful, diverse, interesting. We traveled a lot with my parents for trips, with friends. It's something completely different. In general, I had a happy student life. I had time to live abroad and different corners of the planet to visit. What adventures I did not get into. As they say, it will be something to remember in my old age. It was a very cheerful period of my life, bright, full of events. And then I got interested in playing on the stock exchange. Somehow it happened that I became a successful broker, although I never aspired to it. I thought I would get married and have children, as I dreamed. Someday I would start a family. But I didn't. Work took me over completely. The excitement, the success, the recognition of reputable financiers. I was invited to conduct seminars in large business centers. Big business owners listened to my words. All this made my head spin. I did not notice how my priorities changed. Of course, sometimes I thought about the fact that it was time to get married and become a mom. Time is running out. But on the one hand, I was still young. On the other hand, There was no one I could see as my spouse. Maybe those were just excuses, because I was happy with the life I was leading. Because when I looked at my friends who were mired in childish affairs and problems, I rejoiced in my freedom. The once cheerful and energetic girls turned into some kind of dried-up girls. They only talked about children and their skills. It made me sad. I felt like a queen. Successful, respected, indispensable. Famous economists sought my advice. Magazines wrote about me. It's a feeling I can't describe. This glitter and tinsel overshadowed for me my main desire. I've always dreamed of having children. I wanted to take care of them, to teach them something, to love them. But at that time, for some reason, I decided that motherhood is the fate of lazy, limited housewives. I even condemned women, fully immersed in children, considered them too down to earth, not capable of anything but childbearing. I almost stopped socializing with my family friends. Their children annoyed me. I don't know how it happened. Did you stay late with the baby? One of my friends once asked me that question. She had recently given birth to a son and could not think about anything but her child. I thought about it. Just at that time, I did not want to burden myself with all this. After all, it is so great not to depend on anyone, to be free and easy. I wanted to go to the sea flu with friends. I wanted to go to the club or shopping. I wanted a new novel started and plunged headlong into a beautiful relationship. It seemed to me that I still had time to become a mother sometime in the future, after many years. For now, my life was bright and exciting as it was. And then somehow I got bored with it all. Work, risks, superficial novels, clubs, drinking, dancing, even traveling. I wanted family warmth, a reliable man beside me. I guess the time had come. True, I was already 35 at the time. I remembered my old dream of becoming a mother of many children. Now I looked at my married friends not with contempt and regret, but almost with envy. I too wanted it all. Husband, children, family. Then also came the realization that work and recognition will not replace the warmth of relatives. Even tears came to my eyes at these thoughts. I grew up, I guess. And that's when I met William. A chance meeting at a cafe where we both had breakfast before work. We had what they call a spark. We looked at each other at first. Then he came up to me. "Girl, I keep looking at you and I can't take my eyes off you. You're incredibly beautiful. And your eyes have such amazing eyes. I can see underneath that you are a very kind, caring person." It was nice to receive such an exquisite compliment, especially from someone you liked at first sight. But I hastened to disappoint him. Somehow I didn't feel like hiding anything from this man. "And you're not a very good judge of character. You don't know me at all, and you thought I was kind and good. And that's not true at all." "You don't seem to know yourself very well," William smiled. "I'm a good judge of character and I'm never wrong. You'll find that out." Then we got to talking. William interested me at once. He was so intelligent, so perceptive, and, most importantly, he looked at me with admiration and tenderness. That's how our relationship began. 6 months later, we celebrated a lavish wedding. He turned out to be the owner of a small dairy. What won me over most of all in him was his sense of humor, and a caring mother, of course. He made me feel like a woman in the full sense of the word. It turns out that it is very pleasant when you are cared for, when you are protected. Of course, we did not put off the question of heirs, as both of us were already at the age when it is time to become parents. It turned out that he dreams of a large family, as I once did with William. That childhood dream of mine came alive again. I realized that more than anything in the world I want to become a mother, and as soon as possible. That's when I realized it wasn't that simple. I couldn't get pregnant. For the first time in my life, I couldn't get what I wanted. William told me not to worry. He told me about people he knew who hadn't become parents right away. But it didn't make me feel any better. I snapped at my husband, even though I loved him very much. He patiently endured all my tantrums. I still don't understand where he got so much strength. After a while, we went to the doctors. At first, they couldn't make a diagnosis for a long time. William and I were examined from top to bottom. There were no problems with money, so we visited the most famous doctors both in our country and abroad. After a while, the doctors found the cause of the problem. It turned out that there was a subtle genetic breakdown in my health, which was almost impossible to detect. But also how to correct the situation The doctors had no idea. If I had decided on motherhood earlier, everything would have worked out. But the years, they played against me in my case. They warned me right away that there was no chance. And then I enthusiastically joined the fight. I'm not used to giving up and losing anything. I took the doctor's words as a challenge. And again, treatment, examination, endless tests and procedures. I stopped working. I didn't enjoy anything at all anymore. I had a goal, and I did not hesitate to go to it. How can that be? My dream, and suddenly it doesn't come true. I just couldn't get my head around it. There was a period when I began to hate women with small children and pregnant women. Just because I was so jealous of them. Why did they succeed and I didn't? It's not fair. It's not fair. How are they better than me? I would have been a much better mother. William was so patient with me. He comforted me, supported me. My husband repeated many times that he only dreamed of one thing, that I would come back the same, cheerful, kind, cheerful. I miss my Catherine incredibly. It's been so long since I've been with this intelligent, sensitive woman. Go find that woman, I replied resentfully. Since your wife doesn't suit you anymore. Why are you like this? William sighed and hugged me. I just miss our old life. I wish I could help him, but I was fixated on the unattainable. I'd lost my mind. Let's adopt a baby, William urged. There are so many babies in orphanages who need parents. They've been betrayed from birth, abandoned and forsaken. We have a lot of opportunities. We will give this child or these children everything they need to be happy. Think about it, just think about it. He even showed me pictures of orphans from orphanages. Big eyes and babies touching, defenseless, so much in need of loving and not indifferent adults nearby. But I didn't want to hear anything. I needed my own blood child. What do I need other people's children for? Their parents don't even need them. So what do we need them for? Imagine whose offspring end up in an orphanage. Lazy drunkards. Don't be silly. Everything will work out in the end. But nothing worked out. Doctors were throwing up their hands and increasingly saying that genetic diagnoses were very difficult to work with. Treatment became more and more expensive and more difficult. The prospects were all dim. I spent 5 years trying to have a child. It was a very difficult time. There was hope and disappointment all over the place. I lived in anxiety, then in the pain of failure. William, how did he have so much patience? He was always there to support me, even though I was acting crazy. My husband would talk about having a foster child from time to time, but I wouldn't listen. Those persuasions, they made me angry, didn't they? Now I wanted to prove him wrong too. We're having our own baby, because I said so. He's offering me some bullshit. I've tried everything. I've tried innovative methods, I've tried folk medicine. I even went to a healer. The shaman was running around me, shouting strange words. But even then I thought I was doing everything right, taking every chance I could. A temporary lapse of judgment, that's all. William looked at me like that with regret and concern. He was very afraid for my condition, because I didn't look like myself then. And then, finally, a miracle. One May morning I found out that I was expecting a child. I was overjoyed. I was even torn from the abundance of emotions. When I looked at the positive test, my legs were shaking. Finally, how I wanted to put my life on fast forward at that moment, so that this happy event would come sooner. My so long-awaited baby boy was born. There were still months ahead, but I already felt like his mother. The doctors were surprised at the time. According to them, there was no hope. But my case turned out to be a miracle. I naively believed that everything worked out because my desire was so strong and it changed the world and the order of things in it. And I felt almost omnipotent. William, of course, was very happy too. I felt a kind of superiority over him. How could he talk so much about foster children? He'd tried to reconcile me to our situation, and in the end he'd been wrong. I was happy about that too. I'm embarrassed to write this now. Readers, forgive me for describing everything in such detail here now. Perhaps I need to speak out. I want someone to know about my fate and understand my feelings. Read to the end. Something very interesting and important is waiting for you there. I really want to help you and your baby, and not only financially but also with advice. My life. make the right conclusions, and do not repeat my mistakes. Appreciate what you have. Pregnancy was hard from the beginning. Constant threats of miscarriage. I did not leave the hospital for months. Sometimes for weeks I was lying, not getting out of bed at all, taking care of my baby. My health was deteriorating sharply. Doctors, they offered me to get rid of the pregnancy because the tests said that the body could not cope with the load. My life was in danger. After all, I had a serious diagnosis in which it is not possible to give birth in a good way. I didn't want to listen to anything. To dream of being pregnant for so long. To wait for this moment for so long and suddenly give up on a long-awaited baby? No way. You're doctors, and you're paid a lot of money to do your job, I yelled at the medical staff. Then do it properly. It's only a few months away. It's the 21st century. Is medicine so powerless these days? We're doctors, we're not gods. You suffer, the baby suffers. The consequences could be catastrophic. There are no guarantees. You must understand that. But I did. I didn't want to hear anything. By then I knew I was carrying a son under my heart. I'd even dreamt about him many times. For the sake of this baby, I was ready to endure any pain and to lie in the hospital even for 9 months. I needed a child, and that was it. The fact that the baby suffered in the womb, unsuitable for carrying children, I did not even think about it. That's how selfish I was. William, seeing that I couldn't be persuaded, was there to support me. He didn't argue anymore, so as not to make me nervous. He agreed with everything, held my hand, reassured me, bought all the medications I needed, talked to the doctors. Just a hug when I needed it. I was getting worse. I hoped that the baby was suffering less, but according to the ultrasound, it was also very, very bad. I was so scared for my baby boy. He was the meaning of my life. I talked to my son, asking him to hang in there, to distract myself somehow. I was surfing baby stuff websites, looking at strollers, picking out clothes for my boy. It was such a pleasant hassle. Parcels came home to us. There were many, many of them. Looking at these things, I thought about good things because, well, here they are, proof that William and I are almost parents. There are so many baby things in the house. We just have to wait for their little owner. He'll be the happiest baby in the world. And the difficulties will be forgotten like a bad dream. The boy was born much ahead of schedule, and the manipulations of doctors helped. The body decided to get rid of what was destroying my health and harming me. The baby was weak, painful. I saw his thin arms and legs, some strange, bright skin color. My heart sank with pity and tenderness. Only looking at my son, wrapped in wires, I realized I'd been completely selfish. The doctors warned me this would happen, and now I'm doing much better. My health is recovering rapidly. The baby is bad, all alone in the ICU, fighting for his life. The doctors immediately said there was little hope. Congenital pathology, general infant weakness, because my pregnancy was so difficult. But I still believed in a miracle. I even threatened the doctors that if anything, they would retaliate. Of course, it didn't help. My son struggled for a few days and then gave up after all. When they told me that, the world turned upside down. I was so angry at everyone, blaming the doctors, even William. He, in my opinion, didn't have enough faith in the outcome and therefore was to blame too. It got to the point where William put me in a clinic. A padded room, attentive staff. Talks with a therapist, peace, quiet medication. I began to slowly come to my senses, to rethink and realize things. I realized what was selfish, fixated on their desires, realized how badly behaved towards William. I thought about the future. At that time, I didn't know what I was going to do, but I realized that I should direct my energy not to anger and hatred, but to creation. That's when the conversation with my husband came back to my mind. William is right. There are so many underprivileged children in the world. You have to help them. You have to support them. If you don't have a child of your own, it doesn't mean that there is no one to give your undying love and care to. I returned home a different person. William was the most excited about it. He said he missed the old Catherine so much, and now she was back with him. It was very sweet. The tragedies that had happened to us reminded me of the things I had bought in myriad ways: clothes, toys, furniture. William put them away in a separate room, a kind of warehouse or museum. It was still very painful to look at them. Thrown away, I said to my husband. Why, he wondered. Maybe we should give them to the needy. William was right, as always. I started driving around the shelters with boxes and bags. I met the staff, got to know the children's stories. Lots and lots of stories, complicated fates, tragedies, betrayals. Someday, when I have more time, I will write a book about it. People need to know. It fascinated me. I wanted to help underprivileged kids, to make their lives a little better. And I could. I had all the opportunities, and I think, to organize my own charitable foundation. It's a lot of work, but I can do it. I've already started to learn a little bit about how to formalize it. In the meantime, while I help kids from orphanages, buying things they need, organizing holidays. It is such a joy to see smiles on the faces of these boys and girls. Some time past, I thought I had given away all the things I bought for my son, but one day I came across this stroller. I remembered how carefully I chose it, studying the features, looking closely at the appearance. I wanted my son to be comfortable and good in it, but unfortunately he never had time to try it out. The stroller was stored in the basement, so William and I had forgotten about it. He tensed up when I noticed the thing, thinking I was going to get hurt again. But strangely enough, I felt only a slight sadness, regret, because I already had a meaning in my life again. I knew my baby. What had happened to him? It was all for a reason. Now, in honor of my son, I will be helping many other children. Our boy didn't live very long, but his short life will make a huge difference in this world. But what about the stroller? I had a very interesting idea about this. Children's homes, with whom children have a hard life, everyone knows about it. It is often talked about, but at least they are provided for, always fed and clothed. They lack parental love and care. At the same time, they are financially well provided for. But there is another category of children. Their parents earn pennies and cannot buy them even the most essential things. How many such families do we have? Usually no one helps them. There are mom and dad, let them raise their heirs. That's what most people think. But there are different situations. Not only lazy and irresponsible people get into difficult situations. I decided to leave this stroller where it will definitely be found by people who are in dire need of it. Usually good things that are no longer needed are left near the garbage. That's what I did with the stroller. Thank you for reading this story to the end. I hope my letter eventually found the right recipient. I believe it did. You must be desperate right now. You don't have enough money to live on? You don't see a future. So I want to help you with something else. Not far from the dumpsters where you found the stroller, there's an unfinished store building, an abandoned lot. I left something else under the porch there for you. I hope it will help you get your life together and raise your baby to be a decent human being. Good luck with everything, Catherine. Alice set the sheet aside in confusion and looked at Alex. Do you think this is all true? You mean about something waiting for us under the porch of the unfinished building? About that too. And the whole thing in general. I don't know what to think, Alex shrugged. But we'll definitely look under the porch and right now. I don't feel like waiting until morning. The young parents put their daughter to bed. They waited until she was sweetly asleep in her crib and went outside. They were not worried about their daughter. They knew that she now sleeps at least 4 in a row, and they do not need so much time. It's not far. We could do it in 20 minutes. This is the place, Alex said, dashing up to the porch of the unfinished store in his wheelchair. He bent down and started fumbling under the porch with his hands. Alice was standing next to him and was afraid of something. She looked around, wondering if this was some kind of prank or worse. What if they were being set up? What if right now someone was watching them from around the corner? Look, Alex exclaimed, pulling out a small package. It was wrapped in cellophane. The guy immediately tore the wrapping and whistled in surprise. Alice looked at what he was holding out to her. It was a thick wad of bills of much money. Alice even pinched her hand to make sure it wasn't a dream. There was a fortune here. Maybe it wasn't real? The girl doubted. No, it seems to be real. Alex scrutinized the bills. So, everything in this letter is true from the first to the last word. Unbelievable. Alice still couldn't believe that strangers had saved their family from imminent disaster. But that's how it turned out in the end. The money was enough to rehabilitate Alex. The young man was quickly put back on his feet in a paid medical center. Now he could work again. It's true what they say: if you want to make a person happy, first take something away from him and then give it back. Alex was happy. He could walk at last. True, it took a long time to learn it. Not everything worked out at once. Dad and daughter took their first steps together. One from the moment of birth, the other after the accident. Also, the young had enough to buy their own apartment. A small 2-bedroom in not the most prestigious area of the city, but its own cozy native loved. With what pleasure the young made repairs in their nest and furnished it. Yes, the money found under the porch was enough to settle in the new place. Alex was working again, so the family was no longer poor. Alice was able to sit out her maternity leave with Susie. Now she didn't have to work from dawn to dusk in the canteen. What a blessing it is to see your child grow up, to introduce him to the world, to devote time to the baby without thinking about how to survive. Alex paid off his debt to his former employer and found a new job. Now he didn't work multiple shifts and was much more careful and cautious than before. Life was getting better. One day Alice was walking in the park with a stroller, the same stroller of a wonderful coffee-colored shade. It was designed to be transformed into a sitting vehicle, and Susie was in the stroller, wiggling her legs and looking at the world in wonder. Susie wore a light white dress and a dressy hat. She looked like a doll, and Alice suddenly caught herself in the thought that she is now that happy young mother, one of those who herself once so envious. And it was all thanks to Catherine, a woman who survived tragedy but managed to overcome herself and find her true calling. I guess now Catherine is helping other orphans and poor children. It is wonderful that there are such people in the world. Years passed. Alex and Alice worked, raised Susie. They weren't poor anymore, just an ordinary middle-class family. Even managed to get away to the seaside once in a while. All thanks to the occasional help from complete strangers. Alice tried to look for Catherine, checking the internet, looking through many pages in social networks. Why? Just wanted to say to the person who had done so much for their family's future, thank you. Just a simple thank you. Let Catherine know that her stroller and money really did save an entire family. It would probably make her feel good. But soon Alice realized that Catherine, too, apparently lived in a completely different town because no one supervised the local orphanages. And there was no children's aid fund in their town either. Some kind of fairy, Alex said. And he wanted to find them too. The savior came out of nowhere at a difficult moment and immediately disappeared without a trace. Mysticism, our guardian angel, no other way. The years passed. Susie grew up, turned into a pretty girl. Susie's studies were always excellent. Her parents were proud of their daughter and very much hoped that she, unlike them, will definitely manage to get a good education. Both set Susie on the university. Yes, the girl herself was not against it. Since the 3rd grade, she dreamed of becoming a teacher. Of course, Susie knew the story of the stroller. Her parents told her daughter about it when she was about 5 years old. Alice every day remembered the woman who left an expensive new stroller near the trash. Her face, it was clearly etched in Alice's memory. And Catherine, who she had just read an article about. This was the amazing fairy who had helped their family out of poverty. Doubts, of course, still remained. So Alice began to search for information about the accidental savior. She wanted to know for sure. There were enough articles on the internet about this woman. Her foundation was doing a great job. 1,000 children had received a tremendous amount of support over the years. Catherine did not just help children, she attracted to this cause from the powerful world of this famous actors, businessmen. All of them participated. Catherine has repeatedly emphasized in her interviews that alone would not have coped for anything. The world is not without good people smiling, she said to the journalist. There are far more kind than indifferent and callous. I know that for a fact now. Catherine looked happy, full of energy, satisfied with life. Her eyes, glowing with some special light, had nothing in common with the world-darkened eyes of the woman Alice remembered. It was understandable. Then Catherine, if indeed it was she, was going through a tragedy. Now the woman had found herself and was engaged in an important and very responsible endeavor. "To write or not to write," said Alice aloud. "It's a pity that Alex is on a business trip. I should consult him now." Alice was accustomed to discuss all important matters with her husband. The woman decided to find out a little more about Catherine to see if it was worth bothering such a busy person. Catherine had a rich and colorful life. She traveled extensively both across the country and around the world. Almost always with her were her foster children, now teenagers. So different, so different. How would their fate have turned out if they had stayed in the orphanage? And then, Alice came across an article that destroyed all her doubts, because this interview was about her too, about Alice. It was a long article with many pictures. Catherine answered the questions thoroughly, without skimming the details. "How did it all start?" the journalist asked. "How did you decide that your calling was to help underprivileged children?" "As I said earlier, it all started after William and I lost our son. A long-awaited line child. We had been preparing for his arrival. We had so many things left over. I thought that these toys and diapers, swaddles could serve someone. Our son is gone, but we can't let this stuff go to waste. We delivered bags and boxes to shelters. It's so logical to give unwanted children's things to orphanages. They'll always be useful there." Then, when I thought I had already gotten rid of all the things, I saw the very stroller that I had so carefully chosen for my child. It was painful, I'll admit it. But I had already learned by that time to cope with my emotions and decided that I should help some needy family, people who had a baby. But there was no money for new things for the baby. I had to find a special family. Any family would not suit me. To do this, I even traveled to neighboring towns, looking. I thought I was abnormal myself, but still I continued this strange occupation. Perhaps the tragedy then clouded my judgment. Either way, I have no regrets. Then one day I saw a sad girl. There was so much anxiety in her eyes. Visually, it was noticeable how the fragile shoulders of the girl were pressed with a heavy weight of problems. She was walking through the park next to a guy who was mobile and in a wheelchair. It was probably her husband. The girl held a tiny infant in her arms, pressed the baby to herself, and it was so beautiful. But she didn't realize it herself. Her eyes were splashing in them, despair. The young man in the wheelchair, the brave man, even smiled. But I could see he was on edge, too. I followed this family. They really got me. I walked a little behind them and listened to their conversation. The guy needed expensive treatment. As I understood, something happened to him not so long ago, and he moved into a wheelchair and lost his income. The girl worked tirelessly at a hard job. Her husband took care of the child as best he could. He himself is a profound invalid. But most importantly, they talked about the wheelchair. "A wheelchair?" the journalist asked. "Yes, wheelchairs." It became a kind of sign for me. They dreamed of a stroller for their child, so it would be easier for a man to take the infant to the clinic. And then something clicked in my head. I realized this was the family I had to help, but the stroller wasn't enough. These good kids, they weren't going to make it out of poverty on their own. They needed help getting started, and I could give it to them. Not just could, but I wanted to, because, well, how could I not? I'm sure they did the right thing with the money. Money the journalist didn't understand. Yes, I decided to give them not only the stroller, but also the amount that should have been enough for the guy's treatment. At least for a small apartment, but how to do it so as not to arouse suspicion. I thought about it for a long time, and then the plan somehow formed itself in my head. Alice broke away from the screen and smiled. Wow, she now recognized her story from the other side. It was so interesting, so fascinating and unusual. The woman pulled out the very letter from the photo album. Of course, Alice and Alex had kept the message. Catherine had written it years ago. She so sincerely wanted to help a family in distress. I wrote the future owners of the stroller a whole message on a sheet of paper on both sides. In it, I told them about my life, about the history of the stroller. It was like psychotherapy for me. It was like I was speaking out, pouring out my pain and being healed. At the end of the letter, I told this young couple where to look for money. I hoped that everything worked out well for them. I really wanted to know the fate of this family. I even came to that town on purpose, but I never met any of them in the park. Maybe they'd gone somewhere else. Or maybe we just missed each other. We're really good, Alice whispered into the monitor. We're really doing great, thanks to you. But why didn't you just give them the money? The journalist didn't understand. I can't even remember now. I was in such a state then, in a strange state. Perhaps I didn't want these people to get tense or scared. After all, my story is not simple, and the situation itself might have seemed suspicious. In any case, I wanted to remain a mysterious stranger to this family, being a kind fairy. But it's almost a legendary story. I'm sure it will be passed on in that family from generation to generation. Almost like a fairy tale. A fairy tale, Alice smiled. It was. Susie had thought for a long time that they had actually been helped by a fairy. It turns out that the meeting was not accidental. Catherine knew in advance that the stroller and the money would go to them. And yet there were plenty of happy coincidences in this story. After all, Catherine had come to their town looking for the right family. It was in their town that she'd met her and Alex in the park. Surely they must have attracted attention back then. A strange trio, a young confused woman, a tiny infant, and a guy in a wheelchair. Catherine spotted them, followed them. She heard the scraps, the conversations between the couple and the certainty of her decision to help them specifically. Alice didn't ponder any further. She was already typing a message to Catherine. It was long, almost like that memorable letter from the stroller. Alice told the woman her story of poverty in detail. She mentioned the despair, the accident, the disability of the sole breadwinner, the birth of a premature daughter, the huge debts. And Catherine needs to know that her help really did save an entire family. At the end, Alice wrote about her life today, and even attached photos of her family, including from a vacation at sea. There are no words to express our gratitude. That's how Alice ended her letter. The woman reread the message again and pressed the send button. On another cold January morning, Charlotte lay in her bed and stared up at the ceiling. For 6 months now, every day had started this way. She lay there, horrified at the thought of a dull, meaningless day ahead of her. Charlotte was not yet 30 years old. She wasn't bad looking, but she had never been able to find a husband and build a family. Her rare liaisons with men lasted no more than 6 months. She didn't understand why she had no luck on the personal front. Either men were bad or her character was so bad, but Charlotte didn't worry much about it. She didn't want to start any serious relationships. For several years, she was immersed in caring for her elderly grandmother, the kindest woman who had raised Charlotte since she was 3 years old, ever since her parents had been killed in an accident. She and her grandmother had bailed each other out back then. The grandmother had kept the girl out of the orphanage by taking on the task of raising her, and Charlotte had given the grandmother a new meaning to life. A meaning that was to raise her beloved granddaughter. Most likely, that's what helped the woman cope with the loss of her only son and daughter-in-law. 3 years ago, the grandmother fell ill. She could move around the flat by herself, but still she needed constant care. And of course her granddaughter began to look after her, taking her to doctors, shopping, doing all the housework. At the time, Charlotte was 26 years old. She had just found a good job with a decent salary and was preparing to go for a promotion. Charlotte even thought about moving out of her grandmother's flat into her own, at first rented, and then planned to take out a mortgage, but the elderly woman's illness overturned all these plans. Without thinking, Charlotte forgot about career heights, stayed in her old position, and all her free time devoted to her grandmother. They were unpretentious in everyday life, so Charlotte's salary and grandmother's payments were enough to pay for doctors and medicines. Charlotte hardly remembered her parents. They were often traveling even before their deaths, so they left their young daughter to her grandmother. Because of this, Charlotte had only a few memories of her parents, and she thought some of them were just dreams. And she and her grandmother had hit it off from the start. The older woman had managed to replace Charlotte's dad and mom. In all the years they'd lived together, they hadn't had a single major conflict. Even when Charlotte was going through a transitional age, it may have had something to do with the fact that her grandmother worked as a school teacher and had a good understanding of how to get along with children. For Charlotte, her grandmother was a self-evident part of her life, and she did not think about her death. Even when the woman had had an accident 3 years ago, Charlotte had pushed away the thought that her grandmother would soon be gone. She just gave all the help she could, tried to organize good treatment, and hoped for the best. Before she died, Grandma didn't get worse. She wasn't taken to hospital. She spent the day as usual reading, watching TV, calling her neighbor, and inquiring about her granddaughter's life. Toward nightfall, she said goodnight to Charlotte, and Charlotte went to her room. The next day, Grandma didn't wake up. The days of funeral chores merged into one terrible dream for Charlotte. She couldn't even remember how she had organized everything, how the funeral and the wake had gone. She just wanted to get over it and forget it all as soon as possible. But after all the funeral procedures came an even worse state for Charlotte's silence. It was not only psychologically, but physically difficult for her to return after work to the flat where no one was waiting for her, to the flat where the TV did not work, where there was no aroma of something tasty, where there was no warmth and coziness. She hated waking up in the morning for exactly the same reason. No one else wished her a good morning and good luck before work. She didn't understand why she had to get up every morning and come home every evening now. 6 months of despondency, only occasionally replaced by happy evenings spent with her friend in cafes or at each other's houses. This morning didn't bode well for the day to be any different from the previous ones. Charlotte reluctantly got up, had a coffee and a sandwich, and got ready for work. Despite a good salary, Charlotte dressed, to put it mildly, without glamour. She wore the same clothes for several years, and her winter down jacket, from which the fluff was always trying to come out, had recently celebrated its 5th anniversary. So from the outside, she looked like a poor girl, a typical gray mouse. Almost running, she reached the tram stop and went to work. 8:55, the office was already noisy. The bosses were strict about lateness. Charlotte walked into her office, which was shared with her friend Terry and 2 other female staff members. "What are you doing out of sorts?" her friend asked Charlotte thoughtfully as she sat down in her seat. "I don't know, I just can't. It's the same every day. It's boring." Charlotte showed a thick stack of papers on her desk. "What's all this for?" "You didn't say that when you walked into this office." Terry reminded Charlotte of her first days on the job 4 years ago. Indeed, Charlotte was a model worker with a burning eye and a well-functioning brain. She genuinely loved her job. She didn't just go to it for the money. Colleagues at first were even afraid to approach her, thinking that such efficiency hides a cunning, bossy girl, ready to go over the heads of other employees for the sake of career. But Terry managed, at some point, to break through this shell of a workaholic and see her as a very ordinary, modest, and kind girl. Most likely they managed to get close on the contrast. In contrast to Charlotte, Terry was an extremely sociable, cheerful girl, although not distinguished by great efficiency. Sometimes even Charlotte had to cover Terry's shortcomings in front of her superiors, but such help from her colleague was not worth much trouble. Over the last 6 months, things had changed. Charlotte would come into the office, slumped, do her work, and leave. Each time Terry tried to cheer her friend up in some way. This time, she made the same attempt. "Charlotte, let's go get some air. I heard they opened a bar nearby today. The girls say it's a great place." A bar? Why not? It had been over a month since the last time she'd been out with Terry, and Charlotte decided to give herself a break. But after a couple of minutes, she realized, "No, Terry, I can't tonight." "Why not?" "Come on, we've got to get back to normal." "Do you want to go shopping before the bar? 'Cause you've turned into a mate." "No, I'd really like to, but I've already arranged to go to the bank tonight." "The bank? Is there something wrong with your card, or did you miss a payday yesterday?" "There's nothing wrong with the payroll. It's just, yesterday was exactly 6 months since Grandma left and I have to inherit. I thought I wouldn't have to do anything else but register the flat. But the notary called and said that there is some other box in the bank. I'm going to go find out what it is today. So let's reschedule the bar for tomorrow, for example." "Okay." Chuckles, "If it's a good idea, sure, maybe I'll go with you just in case." "You're going out of the bank alone tonight, it's dangerous." "Don't worry, I'll go by myself." There won't be any diamonds there. My grandmother lived poorly, worked as a schoolteacher. I wouldn't be surprised if there was some mistake and the bank just turned me home, for example. They mixed up the safe deposit box and it wasn't really my grandmother's. Like, whatever. The friends finished talking and got to work. The day passed routinely. The boss in the office came only once, politely asked Terry to correct errors in the report, and left. And Charlotte periodically returned to that mysterious safe deposit box. Before she told Terry about it, the girl had not thought much about inheritance and perceived the forthcoming trips to the bank as an ordinary bureaucratic procedure. But now it didn't seem so ordinary to her anymore. If it's not a mistake, what could be lying there? Perhaps some family jewelry. But then why such a strange place, a safe deposit box? Jewelry is usually kept at home to be looked at or worn. That's what jewelry is. This is a safe deposit box. Charlotte couldn't even remember the last time her grandmother had been to the bank, probably before her illness. Anyway, the closer it got to the end of the day, the more interested Charlotte became. Finally, the clock showed 6 p.m. and all the staff, as if on cue, began to pack up to leave. Charlotte was not usually one of them. She could stay in her office alone until 7, 8, and sometimes even 21 in the evening. Since her interest in work had been lost, she had given that up and started to congregate with everyone else. Perhaps in a crowd of colleagues walking to their bus stops, Charlotte felt less lonely. This time she also jumped up with the others, but not because she wanted to overcome her loneliness. She had to take the tram to the bank, but in the other direction. Charlotte said goodbye to Terry and a few other colleagues and ran to the bus stop. The tram came almost immediately. Charlotte got on it and didn't even bother to take a seat, sitting near the door. There were only 2 stops to go, but for Charlotte the time dragged so slowly that it seemed to her that the tram was traveling across the city. She kept glancing at her watch, worried that she wouldn't make it before the bank closed. It closed at 7 p.m., which was why Charlotte was so worried. When she got to the right stop, Charlotte jumped off the tram and ran to the bank. Fortunately, it was still half an hour before closing time. The girl took a little breath and entered the premises. Taking a number in the electronic queue, Charlotte didn't have to wait long. At this time, there wasn't particularly anyone else in the bank anymore. Charlotte went to the right window and sat down beside it. The banker, a full-bodied man in his 40s, was obviously going home early and was already putting things in his briefcase. "Hello," Charlotte said hello and took out her documents from her bag. "Hello," the banker said, glaring at Charlotte with a grudging look. "I need access to a safe deposit box." "You." The man leaned slightly out of the window, looked at Charlotte again, now more carefully. "Why do you need a safety deposit box?" "I want to see what it looks like," Charlotte replied irritably, looking at the banker's name tag, which read Christopher Brown, Senior Officer, in gold letters. "Christopher, don't you know what a safe deposit box is for?" "Don't be rude, girl." The banker replied sternly, "Give me the number of the safe deposit box and a passport." The banker looked through the passport, wrote down some data, entered the number of the box into the computer. "This box is not in your name," said the man in the same stern tone. "That's right, not in my name. The box belonged to my grandmother. She passed away 6 months ago, and I inherited it. Here's the inheritance certificate." Charlotte handed the paper to the banker. "It says that the box was owned." The banker twirled the certificate, looked at the passport once more and went somewhere else. 2 minutes later he came back and said unhappily, "All right, follow me." Charlotte went with him into another room. The banker opened a heavy metal door, behind which there were hundreds of cells of different sizes. The man looked around and went to one of the boxes. He stuck a small key in the keyhole and opened the lock. Sighing heavily, he reluctantly looked into the cell and was stunned. After standing for a couple of seconds, in a quiet voice he was able to say, "Please come over, the box is open." Charlotte slowly approached the box, as if she wanted to pull a little intrigue, and there was a lot to pull for. In the box was a bar of gold. "Can I take it?" Charlotte asked in a whisper. "Of course it's your property now," the banker replied kindly. His unhappy tone disappeared. Charlotte took the bar in her hands. It looked just like in the films, shiny, shimmering under the light of the bank lamp, stamped with 999.9 and 1,000 grams. The first number means the proof, the banker explained to Charlotte, and the second the weight. On the back there is another stamp with a number and other necessary information to prove the authenticity. Charlotte didn't really listen to what the banker was telling her. She couldn't believe that she was holding a kilo of pure gold in her hands. Even to the touch, it was different from other metal objects of the same size. It seemed to her that the ingot was soft. It felt as if it was warm. "What am I supposed to do with it?" Charlotte asked rhetorically. The banker shrugged his shoulders in response. It was clear from his eyes that he was upset that the bullion had not gone to him. A strange reaction for a banker who operated large sums of money and jewelry on a daily basis. Perhaps he had only served wealthy clients before. The appearance of large sums of money was no surprise to them. And here a poor girl gets a fortune, just like that, instantaneously. Some people dream of such things all their lives, and perhaps the banker was one of those people. After standing for a few seconds, he warned Charlotte that he had to go and get a form for receiving the contents of the safe deposit box. Charlotte didn't bother with the bureaucratic wording and continued to look at the gold. The banker put another bank employee in his place, apparently to keep Charlotte from clearing the bank. Charlotte shifted her gaze from the bullion to her open safe deposit box. At the bottom of the box was some cardboard that was the same color as the box itself, so the banker didn't pay any attention to it. "Excuse me, please." Charlotte turned to the stone-faced employee. "There is something else in the box. Can I take it too?" "If the box is yours, you can," replied the unemotional employee. Charlotte carefully took out the cardboard. It turned out that it was not a picture, but an envelope made of heavy paper. There was nothing on the envelope, no addressee, no author's name, no stamps, just a blank envelope. Charlotte didn't open it, she just put it in her bag. She realized that there was some message from her grandmother inside, and she didn't want to read it in front of strangers. "Before you leave, you will need to sign some papers," the banker suddenly returned. Charlotte: "Sure. Where do I have to go?" "It's protocol to sign right here. But do you really want to take this with you?" The man gently ran his hand over the ingot. "Why do you ask?" Charlotte was surprised. "Would it be safer to leave it in the safe deposit box, or do you want to sell it right now?" "No, I have all my accounts in another bank, and I think that's where the bullion should be deposited in the near future. I like things to be in their proper place." For a few minutes, Charlotte thought that it was really safer to leave such wealth in the bank. But it wasn't just the desire to move the bullion to another bank that possessed her. The little gold brick had a magical attraction, and Charlotte did not want to give it back so immediately. She wanted to look at it again, put it somewhere at home, maybe even show it to a friend. "As you wish. It's your right," the banker said quickly. "Follow me." Having completed all the bureaucratic procedures with the registration of the bullion, Charlotte went home. She didn't want to take the tram with the gold, so she called a taxi. During the journey, Charlotte had a twofold feeling. On the one hand, she was almost in euphoria at the realization that she was carrying $100,000 in her bag. On the other hand, she was intermittently panic-stricken. She kept squinting at the taxi driver, drawing in her mind plots in which he would take her out into the woods and take the bag away. Then Charlotte looked out of the window carefully to see if the taxi driver was taking her on the right road. "Tell me, why are we going this way?" Charlotte asked when the car turned off the avenue that ran along the tram tracks. "There are repair works ahead," the taxi driver answered calmly. "Half an hour in the traffic jam, but this way we'll go round the courtyards quickly." Charlotte's heart began to race, and it became difficult for her to breathe. After a couple of minutes, she managed to pull herself together. She took out her phone and dialed 112 in advance. Charlotte looked at the road even more carefully. It was dark outside, and it was hard to see anything. She moved to the middle of the back of the car and looked out the driver's window. By the light of the headlights, she recognized a small street that ran along the main avenue. It was just over a kilometer from home. Charlotte calmed down a little and moved back to the passenger door. "Don't worry, we'll be there in a few minutes," the taxi driver said carefully as he watched Charlotte toss and turn on the back sofa. "Yes, okay, I'm calm," Charlotte answered him in a slightly shaky voice. Less than a minute later, the car turned again. "You're off the right track." The navigator answered loudly, and Charlotte realized that she couldn't stay in the car any longer. "Stop here, please," she shouted. "How here?" "We've only got a little bit to go," the taxi driver replied calmly. "I know, but I need to get out here right away." "Okay, whatever you say." The taxi driver sighed heavily and stopped the car. Charlotte quickly slipped the fare money into the taxi driver's hands and got out of the car. Almost at a run, she headed towards her house. It was indeed a short journey, but the second strange turn seemed too suspicious to Charlotte. She ran along the same street that ran along the avenue and soon saw that a road service was standing on it, with a fenced pit dug right in the middle. The workmen were changing a pipe which ran across both the avenue and this street, and so there was nothing suspicious in the taxi driver's sudden turns. He was, however, looking for the easiest way to get to Charlotte's house. Charlotte breathed a sigh of relief and walked towards her house with a quiet step. She even felt a little ashamed of her overcautiousness. How could the taxi driver even know that she had something expensive in her bag? Yes, sudden riches rarely lead to good things. It wasn't long before Charlotte saw her 5-story building on the horizon. Just as she turned into the courtyard, someone tugged her purse sharply, but Charlotte held it firmly in her hands. She turned round and saw a man with a hat and a scarf wrapped around his face. He was pulling the bag towards him, but Charlotte had no intention of letting go. She started screaming loudly. At that moment, 2 men approached them, and the man in the scarf, apparently frightened, let go of the bag and started to run. No one caught up with him. The men approached Charlotte. "Are you all right?" one of them asked fearfully. "Yes, I'm fine, thank you," Charlotte answered after catching her breath. "I'm calling the police," said the other man and pulled out his phone. "Thank you. I don't think he would have got away if it wasn't for you." "Why are you walking alone at this hour?" "I've been used to walking alone around this time all my life." Charlotte talked to her casual acquaintances for a while longer, and the police arrived at the scene. The officers quickly took statements from Charlotte and witnesses, took pictures of the purse, and went to the next call. Charlotte thanked the men again and went home. She didn't like the fact that the police officers had left so quickly. It even seemed to Charlotte that they weren't even going to look for anyone. They just machine-filled out all the paperwork and left. She realized that the police had a heavy workload, but they could have at least taken her to the station so that the experts could fingerprint the bag, draw up a sketch, and do all the other things they usually did in detective shows. Almost immediately, however, Charlotte remembered that the man was wearing gloves, and there was probably no point in fingerprinting her bag. She went up to the first floor, entered the flat, and felt fear again, a very real animal fear for her life. What if the perpetrator decides to come back? After all, if he attacked Charlotte outside her very house, that means he knows her home address. Alexandra pulled out her phone and selected one of the contacts. "Hello, Terry, come to my place soon, please. I'll explain everything later. But it's really hard for me to be alone right now. Thank you. I'll be waiting." Charlotte was afraid her friend had gone to the bar and wouldn't have heard her call. But judging by the background, Terry had gone home after work. Essentially, Charlotte had no one else to turn to for help. Her childhood friends had moved away to different cities, and Terry was the only person she had left who was truly close to her. When her friend agreed to come over, Charlotte felt much calmer. She made some tea and sat down on the sofa. Charlotte put her bag next to her. After taking a few sips, she took the purse in her hands, carefully undid the zip and opened it. The bullion was in place. Before she did so, it occurred to her that there might not be any gold in the purse. After the attack, Charlotte hadn't even checked to see if the man had taken anything, but it was all right. Charlotte didn't bother to take out the bullion. She zipped up the bag and set it back on the couch. What could it have been? She thought about the incident. Maybe it was just an accident. No, I don't believe in such accidents. Right outside my house, a thug purposely tried to snatch my purse. There's no such thing as coincidence. Then who set him on me? The only person who knew I had the bullion was Christopher the banker. He treated me with such hostility, and when he saw the bar, his face changed. That's when he decided to take it from me. He's seen my passport, he knows where I live. What a scoundrel. Exactly. He went out a few times, probably phoning his accomplices. Maybe it's a standard pattern for them. Tracking down the lonely and poor and robbing them of their last possessions. What a nightmare. Charlotte mentally uttered many more words against the banker, but stopped herself at one point. And why him, after all? Didn't anyone else know that she might have something expensive in her bag, like the other bank employees or Terry? Charlotte had told her she was going to the bank to collect her grandmother's inheritance. No, that certainly couldn't be it. She'd known her friend for so many years, and she'd never shown that she was capable of something like that. Yes, Terry doesn't have iron discipline. She has a rather infantile attitude to life, but to commit a crime, and against whom? Against her best friend. Charlotte immediately rejected this version. After sitting for a while longer, Charlotte remembered the letter. She opened the inside pocket of her bag and took out an envelope. Carefully unsealing it, Charlotte took out a quadruple folded A4 sheet of paper and unfolded it. Just as Charlotte had expected, it was a letter from her grandmother, in very beautiful handwriting, in black ink. The following lines were written out. Dear Charlotte, if you're reading this letter, it's probably been over 6 months since I've been gone. I am writing this to you at a time when you are studying hard for your first university exams. You are going through a difficult period, searching for yourself, new challenges from life. That's why I didn't start this conversation right now, but decided to write a letter to the future. Maybe the day will come when I will be ready to tell you this story personally. But I realize that I am not getting younger every year, so just in case I will tell you everything in a letter, because death may precede the moment of my readiness to talk to you. When you were a child, you sometimes asked about your grandfather, and I usually avoided answering your questions. As you may remember, your grandfather, David Wilson, was a geologist looking for minerals. In Alaska, he and his group found some gold deposits. This place was a kilometer away from the gold mines known to our country at that time, and the group did not hurry to inform the local authorities about it, but decided to organize their own mining. I don't think it was a matter of personal desire of your grandfather and his colleagues to get rich. He told me that he just didn't trust the local authorities. They'd probably organize underground mines and send the geologists back to town as soon as possible. Unwilling to let that happen, the group set about mining on their own. I don't know if that was really the case. Anyway, I don't judge him, and you don't judge him. Remember, I've been telling you since you were a kid that you can't judge anyone in this life. Anyway, the place turned out to be fishy. They were catching up to 100 grams a day, and so it went on for almost a fortnight. One day they were spotted by workers from the official mines. His name was Alex Brown, and they had known Grandpa for several years. At first they were even friends. Alex Brown used to come round to our house sometimes, but then it was like a cat got between them. I guess your grandfather didn't like the fact that Brown was going to frame the plant manager to take his place. They've been enemies ever since. Of course, when Brown saw that Grandpa was doing illegal mining, he immediately wrote a denunciation on the whole group. It was the 1960s, the so-called thaw. People were coming out of prison, and with us the exact opposite happened. Your grandfather was sent to a camp for 5 years for stealing the country's property or something like that. We were lucky 10 years before that. The punishment for the same offense was much harsher. Your daddy was 2 years old at the time, and I raised him by myself until he was 5. For good behavior, Grandpa was released a couple of years early. I didn't know at the time that Grandpa's group didn't hand over all the gold to the police when they arrested him, but somehow Brown knew about it. As soon as he learned that Grandfather was free, he began to torment our family and the families of Grandfather's colleagues from the geological group. For some reason, he demanded that the gold be returned to him and kept threatening to turn Grandpa in. And one day, Grandfather and his comrades got fed up with Brown's behavior. I don't know what they did to him, but after that they put Brown in jail for 5 years. 2 years later, we got the news that he died in prison. From then on, we lived like a normal, ordinary family. My grandfather tried not to remember about the years spent in prison, and I did not remind him. 30 years passed, the government changed, and it was the time when everything was possible. We were excited about your birth and forgot about what happened 30 years ago. But soon Grandpa fell ill. He was still on his feet but realized he didn't have long to live. One day, when he and I were alone in the flat, your grandfather pulled back the cupboard, cut a piece of linoleum with a knife, and from under the floor wood, took out some paper bags. He opened them up and laid out many middle pieces of gold on the table. They were dirty, unformed lumps, as if they had just been pulled from a mountain stream. I realized that back then, in the 60s, he had never given the authorities the gold he had mined. That same day we took the jewelry to the smelter. We were not even asked where we got such wealth from. In the end, the gold was melted down to a kilogram bar. There was even a little bit left over. This remaining part helped us a lot in the 90s, so we never had any problems with how, for example, to get you ready for school. 6 months later, Grandpa died. I kept that bullion in the cupboard under layers of old bed linen. I even forgot about it for a while. But now I realize it's a bad idea to keep jewelry in my underwear, and I need to take it to the bank. I don't know if I'd dare tell you all this in my lifetime, probably not. Please forgive me for not being frank enough with you, but there are some things you shouldn't rush into. Now you know about not the easiest thing in our family's fate. I hope you react to it with understanding. Be careful with the gold. A flock of kites likes to swoop down on sudden riches. Take care of yourself. Love you and kisses, always, your grandmother. With tears in her eyes, Charlotte finished the letter. Of course, she had no thought of offending either her grandfather or her grandmother. Charlotte walked over to the cupboard that had been against the wall all her life. With difficulty, but she managed to push it back a little. She squatted down and examined the linoleum. Right next to the skirting board, Charlotte saw these very grandfatherly cuts. She wanted to see what the hiding place under the floorboards looked like, but at that moment the intercom rang. Charlotte picked up the phone and heard Terry's familiar voice. Walking up to the flat, her friend immediately started questioning Charlotte. "So what's your problem?" "I've never driven so fast before. My friend scared me." "Follow me." Charlotte answered her quietly and went into the room. She put her friend on the sofa, silently took her bag, opened it, and took out a bar. "Look." "What's this?" Terry darted her eyes out and didn't take her gaze off the gold. "A kilogram bar, pure gold." "May I?" Terry held out her hands for the bar. Charlotte handed it to her. "Wow, did your grandmother give you this?" "Yes," Charlotte replied, and briefly recounted the contents of her grandmother's letter. "Wow, mate, you're lucky. How much is it now in rubles?" "I don't know. I haven't looked yet." Such wealth, and she didn't even look. Terry was surprised and took out her phone. "Let's see, it's $180,000, Charlotte. Yeah, by small-town standards, that's a lot of money. That's 2 flats." Charlotte was surprised at the value of her inheritance. She thought the bullion would be worth less than $100,000, but here it was. So it was no wonder that someone was after her. "Have you thought of where you're going to spend the money?" Terry asked curiously. "No, not yet," Charlotte replied. "I didn't call you just because of the bullion." "So what happened?" "When I came home with the bullion, someone tried to rob me." "How'd you get away?" "No, passers-by scared the guy away. Then the police were here. I'm really scared." "I see. Someone was jealous of your sudden wealth." "Did the police say anything?" "No, they said they'd look into it." "Well, the usual, but I suspect one person. The banker who handled my inheritance. He's the only one who knew I had gold in my bag." "That's right. Oh, I know that petty breed." I had one, a banker, let's say, who nearly robbed me of every last cent. Seriously, you never told me. It was a long time ago. So what did you tell the police about this scumbag? No, I was in shock at the time. I only remembered about the banker when I got home. Oh, you didn't tell me about the prime suspect. Okay, let's go to the police right now. You can tell me everything there. What now? Charlotte was surprised. Well, when will you be attacked a second time? Or when that banker is on holiday somewhere in the Canary Islands? Let's go, now. What if you think it needs to be done so urgently? Charlotte got up from the sofa and started to get ready, but soon stopped. Wait, Terry. Charlotte sat down and asked her friend to sit down. Listen, I didn't think at all. Maybe I shouldn't have dragged you into all this. You see, it's very dangerous. At any moment, they'll want to do it again. Attack me, break into my flat. I don't want you near me at that moment. Call as they could do the same to you. And I don't want to hear any more of that, Terry said sternly. If they come after the two of us, it'll mean only one thing: we'll fight back. So mate, don't worry about me. We've been through this before. And as for the flat, they probably know your address. The bank has all the details. Well, then what we'll do is, after the police station, we'll go to my place. You'll stay at my flat for the duration of the investigation. They don't know my address. Thank you very much. The friends hugged and walked downstairs to Terry's car. On the way, Charlotte thought about Terry and her courage. She hadn't even raised an eyebrow when she knew they could be in danger right now. Charlotte chastised herself for being suspicious of her friend. Even though she rejected them right away, it turns out that Terry is even more than a true friend. She is a fearless person. Charlotte was so impressed by her friend's words and decisive actions that she didn't even think about the strangeness of Terry's behavior. What if she's only acting so boldly because she's confident of her safety? It's not like her accomplices are going to attack her themselves, so she's playing the hero. But Charlotte did not care for these thoughts. She thought she should try again to dissuade Terry from helping her so insistently. At the very least, explain to her that staying with her wasn't the best or safest idea. Terry, are you sure I won't be in the way? Charlotte asked, hoping for some sort of personal reason for her friend. Charlotte, why are you laughing? You know that I have no one to bother you. I've been living alone for so long. Yeah, we could use a man right now, sure. Come on, we can manage without men, Charlotte replied to Terry's remark. She realized that there was no point in talking her friend out of it and decided not to resist any further. When they reached the police station, they went to the front desk. Hello, we'd like to make a statement. Terry began to speak loudly into the window of the duty officer. Terry, maybe I'd better, Charlotte interrupted her friend, reminding her that she was the victim here. Yeah, sure, Terry cooled down a bit. All right, girls. Can you please decide what you want? Asked the officer on duty irritably. Do you understand? Charlotte began to explain quietly. I was attacked today. They wanted to rob me. Right. The officer on duty didn't listen to Charlotte. He took out a piece of paper from under the desk. Write a statement. No, you don't understand me. Charlotte continued calmly. The police have already been called. I gave them a statement, and they took all the statements they needed. Then what do you want? Wait for them to call you. The policeman replied, still irritated. What's the matter with you? That when they kill you, then you come. Terry jumped in. Can you listen to the man? Or are you going to interrupt him every 10 seconds? So, woman, who are you anyway? The officer turned to Terry. Do you want me to take you out? You don't need to take anyone out. Charlotte modestly stood up for her friend. The point is that I remembered some new circumstances regarding the attack. I see your point. Give me a name. Wilson. Wilson. Stand by. The desk officer turned to the computer and typed in Charlotte's name. Then he picked up the phone and dialed a number. Comrade Major, the victim came in on your case today. She says new circumstances have come to light. What? And even so, well, I'll send her to you." The officer on duty hung up the phone and turned to Charlotte. "So, in your opinion, the case has already found the right person. Go to the 7th office, they'll meet you there." "Found how?" Terry asked loudly. She was clearly more surprised than Charlotte. Terry wanted to go with her friend, but the duty officer stopped her. "Citizen, you wait here. Nobody let you in there." "What do you mean? Nobody let me in?" "I'm the victim's friend," her only support, Terry said, indignantly. "You're a stranger," replied the policeman sternly. "Terry, don't worry, I'll manage on my own," Charlotte reassured her friend and went straight down the corridor. The 7th office was not far from the gatehouse. When she reached the door, she stopped, and after a few seconds a man in civilian clothes came out of the office. "Are you Wilson?" he asked. "Yes," Charlotte replied. "I'm an investigator. Smith is my last name. I was handed the case of the attack on you. Anyway, we found your failed burglar on a hot lead." "And who was he?" "Recidivist, got out of prison 6 months ago for robbery, decided to pick up where he left off, didn't even change neighborhoods. He must have lost his touch while he was in prison, even forgot about the cameras. 2 hits in an hour, so we caught him quick. Now you're gonna have to make a positive ID." "Caught him so fast. What if he remembers me in the lineup?" "Look, he probably remembered you when he tried to steal the bag. However, for your peace of mind, we're going to take security precautions. You'll be looking at him through mirrored glass. He won't see you." "Good." Chuckles, "Then I'm calm," Charlotte replied. The investigator went back into the office and returned 30 seconds later. "Come in. Everything's ready." Charlotte, worried, walked into the office. Along the whole wall, there was indeed a window with a man sitting behind it. "Excuse me, is he going to sit here alone?" Charlotte whispered to the investigator. "I thought that identification is when you have to choose among several people." "This is a different identification," Smith hissed back at her. "Not only can't he see you, he can't hear you, so you can talk in your own voice." "Good." Charlotte looked at the man behind the glass. He looked like that man, but he didn't look like that man, you see. He was wearing a hat and a scarf, and the scarf was all over his face, and only his eyes were visible. "Okay, hold on a second." The investigator went to his desk, opened a drawer, and took out a cellophane bag with his belongings. Then he went into the bright room where the alleged robber was sitting and handed him the things. He put on his hat and scarf, and the investigator returned to Charlotte. "Now, what do you think?" "Now it looks like it," Charlotte exclaimed. In front of her sat an exact replica of the robber. "Very good. Go into the next office. Now we'll make all the necessary formalities." Charlotte went into the next room, and a minute later the investigator came in. "Please tell me, have you questioned him yet?" Charlotte asked. "We have, but what are you interested in?" Smith asked incredulously. "I just wanted to know, did he say anything about the client?" "What client?" "Citizen Wilson. This man is a repeat offender. He spent his life snatching purses from girls. Nobody ordered you, don't worry." "Really? Then why don't I just walk away?" "Sign here." The investigator handed Charlotte a piece of paper, "and you can go." After signing, Charlotte left the investigator's office. No sooner had she got to the front desk than Terry pounced on her with questions. "Did you find it?" "We found him. Some kind of gangster." "So he was acting on his own?" "Yeah, the banker, as it turned out, had nothing to do with it." The friends went outside and got into Terry's car. "So where are we taking you?" "My place or yours?" Terry asked, pulling out of the police car park. "If it's going to end so well, let's go to my place. I think we both need a bit of a rest. I've had the wine for almost a year now." "Different conversation, mate," Terry said cheerfully. "Are you sure you don't want to come back to my place? You're not afraid?" Why would I be scared if they found him? Then it was just a coincidence. And nobody ordered me. I get it. I get it. Terry said snidely. Are you worried about your gold? No, Charlotte laughed. I brought it with me. It's in my bag. How? Terry was loudly surprised. You've been carrying the bar around with you all this time? Of course, it didn't seem safe to leave it at home, especially in case the police needed it. I didn't know how quickly they'd solve things there. Maybe they'd take it as evidence. I'm amazed at you, Terry said with a change in mood. They tried to snatch your bag just a few hours ago, and you're carrying a bullion bar. You're just fearless, aren't you? What are you so worried about? I'm in the car with you. Nobody knows I've got gold in there. Well, you're lucky you're with me. Well, Charlotte, maybe you did the right thing, but next time, warn me that you have such a valuable cargo with you. They drove in silence to Charlotte's flat. Damn it, I forgot to switch off the light, Charlotte said frustratedly, looking out of the car at her windows. The meters must have counted. She's got a bar of gold in her bag and she's thinking about the communal flat? Terry laughed. They parked not far from the entrance and went up to the flat. The front door was slightly ajar. Did you forget to lock the door too? Terry asked in a whisper. I don't remember. It's crazy, Charlotte replied and slowly opened the door. She stepped carefully into the corridor and into the room. What on earth? I knew it. The whole room was trashed. All the cupboards and drawers were open and things from there were scattered all over the floor. It was the same mess in the kitchen and the other room. What happened here? Terry asked, also entering the room. There can't be any coincidence, Charlotte said excitedly. They were looking for gold. But it could be that Terry tried to find some other explanation for what had happened, but couldn't find any. Yes, you're right. It's hardly a coincidence. And now we'll make sure of it, Charlotte said in a shaky voice and went into the second room. There she went to the cabinet, all the drawers of which had been taken out. She took one of the drawers and pulled out a small box and an envelope from there. From the box, Charlotte pulled out earrings, and from the envelope several $100 notes. Look, these are all my rainy day supplies. I've had them here for about 5 years. Baby earrings that a relative gave me. They're not worth as much as gold, but they're not cheap. If they just wanted to make a profit out of this flat, they'd have taken them anyway. I'm not even talking about dollars. No, they were looking for gold bullion. My grandmother told me to be careful with it. Okay, we need to call the police. Charlotte sat down on the couch and looked at Terry. Look, really, this is getting out of hand. I'm asking you to go home. It's very dangerous with me right now. I'm telling you again, I'm not interested in hearing you worry about me, Terry replied firmly. Then Charlotte got up and went to the front door. She closed all the locks that were on it and even bent a wooden mop to the handle, thus making an improvised lock. Charlotte, was this lying here? Terry asked from the room. What are you talking about? Charlotte walked back into the living room and looked at her friend. Terry was standing by the desk. All the papers and typewriters that had been on it had been thrown to the floor. Only one small note remained on the desk. Charlotte walked over to the desk, picked up the piece of paper, and read what was written on it. If you value your life in the slightest, take the gold back to where you got it from. Charlotte put the note on the table and covered her face with her hands. Charlotte, what are you doing? Terry came up to her friend and put her arm round her. Now it's clear that it's the banker. Where you took it from is obviously a safe deposit box, so he got caught. He thought you'd get scared, bring the gold to the bank and he'd take it, but nothing. Now you'll tell the police, he'll be arrested and the adventure will be over. I hope so, Charlotte whispered back. A few minutes later, the intercom rang. The police had arrived. The task force consisted of 2 operatives and an expert. Hello, I'm Captain Morris. This is Lieutenant Commander White. Tell me, did you touch anything here before we got here? Yeah, a little. Charlotte replied. Well, you'll still have to give your fingerprints to our experts so we can distinguish them from those of the criminals. The captain began questioning Charlotte while the senior lieutenant talked to Terry. The lieutenant did his job faster and Terry sat on the couch with Charlotte. The captain continued to ask his questions. Do you suspect anyone? Has anyone threatened you? I've already been assaulted today and Investigator Smith was in charge of it. I thought there was some kind of liaison between officers on your force. Look, we can have several attacks like this in a day, and we're not digitized yet. The captain opened a folder and began to sort through the papers. Smith, you say? Yeah, got it. Morris pulled out some printouts and took a quick look at them. Right, well, it's a bit clearer now. Although, to be honest, it didn't. So you suspect someone, remember? Yes. I think the banker from the bank is behind this. The banker? You know, there's a lot of things I expected to hear, but not that. What could you possibly have done to stop the banker? Charlotte told the captain about her trip to the bank, her inheritance, showed him the gold bar, and held out the note she had left. Who else could it be but him? Charlotte summarized the story. Yes, it's very interesting. The captain examined the note from all sides. Did anyone else know about the gold? No, just me and my grandmother, who's been dead for 6 months. What about this girl here? Morris pointed to Terry. Terry? Oh, come on. She's my friend. And she found out about the gold after the attack. So what if she's a friend? The captain asked, You know, I've had more than my share of this in my practice. What close people have not attacked each other? Are you out of your mind? Terry jumped up. I told you I didn't even know he existed. You just want to blame some random person. I get it. You're just bought by this bank, all of you. Sit down, please, Morris told her in a stern voice, and keep your temper in check. No one is bought by anyone, and no one is accusing you, and it's my job to suspect everyone, including you. But let me tell you something, Charlotte interjected. It's true. It's nonsense. Terry was with me the whole evening. She came to my aid at the first call. I don't want you to even suspect her. I'm sorry to say that your wishes don't determine our job. Well, I guess we'll get back to Terry. The captain paced the room and turned to Charlotte. There's something I'm having trouble with. What's not working for you? Charlotte asked. From her tone, she no longer had the energy to express surprise or indignation. Her voice sounded irritated and tired. Look, why would your banker set himself up like that? Leave a note, you might say, with the exact address, the bank that is. So perhaps he counted on the fact that I, frightened and frantically running back to the bank to give the gold, without even running to the police. That's right. Terry supported her friend. Maybe they have it all automated there? You check it out. We will. Morris looked at Terry with disbelief. So it doesn't work. Let's say you got scared and took the gold back to the bank. Then the banker gets into your safe deposit box and takes the gold for himself. Well, let's assume that the whole bank is in collusion and they intend to take your gold, and none of the security officers or just colleagues will ask your banker what he is doing. But still, the day will come when you will go to the bank to take your gold or just come out of shock the next day and run to complain to the police. Then a simple inquiry to the bank will reveal that there is no gold and the banker will be arrested. It's just one big, handmade setup. And if they have such a gangster scheme, why don't we have a single report in our department related to this banker and this bank branch in general? With that kind of approach to crime, they'd be as screwed up as they are on the first case. Don't you think that's a bit rubbish? Charlotte shrugged her shoulders helplessly and sighed. Is that why you suspect me? Terry, unlike her friend, continued to be active. I'm telling you, it's my job to suspect. All right, let's say you didn't know about the gold. Not supposing, but definitely, Charlotte whispered. I told Terry about the possible inheritance when I didn't know what was there. So you knew. Morris pointed his finger at Terry. You knew your friend had unexpected wealth. What difference does it make what's in there? Even if you didn't know about the gold, you knew that the box could hypothetically contain something expensive. And you told them to write the note to your forgeries to lead us on a wild goose chase to frame the banker. Isn't that right? Well, look, it's just something. Terry was furious. She couldn't get any coherent words out of her mouth. It's just a load of bollocks. Charlotte, who had a little more energy after she realized that the captain had taken her friend seriously, said instead, I distinctly remember what I told Terry at work today. I told her that there was some strange inheritance, but that it couldn't be anything rich, and that there must be some mistake. You'd have to agree that's hardly the sort of thing that would interest a criminal looking to make a fortune. Maybe. But then tell me, Terry, where were you when the flat was burgled? Well, I've already told your colleague everything. I was at the police station waiting for Charlotte. So you weren't near Charlotte, and you were technically able to make calls and send messages? Yes, Terry shrieked. I was running a gang of robbers from the police station and telling them which flat to rob over the phone. Are you a normal person? Tell me, please. You've got the story on a plate. Here's the banker. Here's the motive. Here's everything. But no, you keep on doing nonsense and accusing innocent people. Terry took her phone out of her pocket and tossed it towards the policeman. Here, you can read my correspondence, order call details, anything you want. We can do that. Morris said a little apprehensively. He was impressed by Terry's speech. All right, I see. Let's get back to the banker. Suppose the hilarious thing at all, it was his first case. An inexperienced crook, so to speak, with a job in a bank at a not too young age, decides to take up theft. All right, we'll accept that too. Morris again took the note left on Charlotte's desk, but there is another circumstance which again breaks your version. What do you think is the purpose of this criminal group led by the wily banker? What is it? Terry was outraged. To prey on lonely people. Well, is it only gold? What do you mean? Charlotte asked. If they wanted to rob you, why didn't they take the dollars and earrings? It's not that much, but it's something. So they didn't organize the whole thing for nothing and risk their freedom. Maybe they don't work for change, Charlotte whispered. But mentally she knew that the money and jewelry left in the flat really shattered all her and Terry's assumptions, and they couldn't have failed to see Charlotte's stash. Then cross out the versions with me too, Terry said loudly. My accomplices would have needed that money too. Yes, the captain scratched the back of his head. You didn't know that there was gold in the box. So if your goal was just jewelry, you would have taken what's in here. Really, Terry asked sarcastically, are you sure about that? Shouldn't I be searched and detained for 48 hours just in case? I could run away. But why are you making fun of me? I told you, it's my job. Look, these ill-fated notes have ruined our whole case. We're gonna have to start over. Charlotte, can you think again, please? Who else could theoretically know that you had the gold? I don't know. No one but this banker knew I had the gold. But why didn't his accomplices take the other jewelry? I have no idea. Well, we'll go to the bank tomorrow and question him anyway. Morris looked at his watch. Look, it's after 1 o'clock in the morning, and we haven't made any progress. Well, thank you for your help with the investigation. If anything changes, you'll get a call right away. Please don't leave town and stay in touch. Morris shifted his gaze to Terry. You too. The captain signaled to the expert and the lieutenant to wind down. Charlotte stood up to escort the operatives out, but immediately stopped. Wait, Brown, I got it. I'm sorry. Are you all right? The captain was surprised by Charlotte's sudden realization. Can I get you some water? I realized why they didn't care about the rest of the jewels. They were tasked with finding the gold bar, and it was banker Christopher Brown who did it. Look, you and I have spent so much time sitting here talking, reasoning, making logic, making cause and effect connections, and now you're at it again. But no, it doesn't make common sense. Morris persuaded Charlotte, but she wouldn't listen to him. She was looking through the scattered things for her grandmother's letter, which was in the gold box in the bank. Is that what you're looking for now? Where is it? Charlotte couldn't find the cardboard envelope. "I need a letter." "Citizen, isn't that it?" An expert came out of the next room with Grandma's letter in his hands. "Yes?" Charlotte exclaimed, taking the envelope from the employee. "Thank you, and how it got there, I don't understand. Now, wait a second." Charlotte took the letter out of the envelope and looked for her great-grandfather's lines for imprisonment. "Well, yes, of course, here it is. Look, Comrade Captain." "What have you got there?" Morris approached Charlotte. One day they were spotted by a laborer from the official mines. His name was Alex Brown. The banker is a descendant, a grandson, probably, of a man who had a conflict with my grandfather over gold. The captain took the letter and read the lines himself, thought for half a minute, and said, "Very interesting version, cinematic. But how can you be so sure that the banker is a descendant of the same Brown? You don't even know what your grandfather's friend or enemy looked like. Sure, it's a small town, and Brown's not the most common name, but it's just a theory." "It's not just a theory," Charlotte persuaded the captain. "It would be nothing more than an interesting conjecture, were it not for all the other circumstances. You lacked motive to finally select the banker as the prime suspect, and now you have it. All the offenses were committed in such a slapdash manner because it really was his first case. Well, the type, because how could he hire anyone? That's for you to find out. But the important thing is we now have an answer to the question of motive." "You're right, I don't disagree. But we still don't have enough to arrest him immediately. We need to investigate the bank itself. If we go after your banker now, we may not have enough evidence. What's more, if the court refuses to arrest him because of this, he may flee with his accomplices. So tomorrow morning we'll go to the bank with a group, shake things up, interrogate, lift documentation, and only then we'll bring charges against the banker. And if he refuses, he'll say, 'I don't know any Browns, just namesakes.' Maybe we can figure out a way to catch him in the act." Terry suggested it. "You got something concrete in mind? How about you stick a chip on a bar of gold, or give Charlotte a fake bar with a chip already embedded in it. She'll deposit it in a safe deposit box, and when the banker decides to steal it, you'll know about it." "Oh, where are you all going?" Morris sighed heavily. "Where am I going to get you a fake bullion with a chip overnight? And if you stick something on the real one, a banker who has seen such ingots more than once in his life will immediately find the extra parts on it. We can't do that. We'll figure it out without the chips on the spot. He's got accomplices, and it's possible they're bank employees, so it's important for us to grab their whole office with a sudden effect." "Then what do we do?" Charlotte asked. "We go with a clear conscience tomorrow morning to another bank. Deposit the gold there. It's the safest thing to do. He wouldn't dare to clean out a whole bank for a bar." "And you?" Charlotte wondered. "What about us? We'll work with your banker," I explained, "but you'll just leave us here overnight. What if he wants to try again and break in again?" Oh, the captain sighed heavily again. "Okay, Comrade Senior Lieutenant, has the service car not left yet?" "No, it has the bored policeman," answered the captain. "Then you stay in it for the night, together with our driver. Stand outside the entrance and keep an eye on anyone who comes in here, and the expert and I will drive my car then." It was evident from the senior lieutenant's face that it was not in his plans to stay the night near the victim's entrance, but he would not disobey the order. The captain took a small card out of his pocket and handed it to Charlotte. "Here's my card. If you need anything, call me. The lieutenant will leave his phone number for you too." Charlotte thanked the captain, and the task force finally left the flat. "Well, I'm gonna go too, so I won't keep you." Terry started packing. "You're crazy. What if they track you down?" "No, stay here. It's safer under guard." Charlotte wouldn't let her friend go home. "Well, I'll feel safer with you." "All right, I'll stay here." Terry went to the window to think that just a few hours ago, I didn't realize I'd be guarded by the police. What an adventure. "Tell me about it." Charlotte also went to the window and looked down. A police car with its lights on was parked outside. They wouldn't believe you if you told anyone. but I still can't understand it." Terry moved away from the window and sat down on the sofa. "Why couldn't you have gone straight to the banker's house and arrested him? There's motive, there's evidence." "Maybe they were just too lazy to look for him. Maybe he doesn't live at his registered address." "What then? We need to make an inquiry to the bank and talk to colleagues. And it's not easy to do that at night. So they're hoping to take him straight to the bank." "I still don't like it. And if it's not his shift tomorrow, then what?" "I don't know. I don't want to get into this whole investigative thing. I just want it to be over soon." "So do I," Terry said, and the friends were silent for a while. They stared at the wall and listened to the ticking of the grandmother's clock, each thinking about her own thoughts. At one point, Terry asked, "Now, have you thought of what you're going to do with the gold when it's all over?" "Why do you ask me that twice?" Charlotte grinned. "No, let everything be over first, and then I'll think about it. To be honest, I'm less and less happy about this wealth. I'll have to get rid of it sooner rather than later." "Yes, it doesn't bring you happiness, but that's for now. So don't be discouraged. We'll solve everything." The friends began to get ready for bed. Charlotte made Terry's bed in the other room, and she wanted to lie down on the sofa in the living room. Having already switched off the lights, Terry said, "Look, thank you." "For what?" Charlotte didn't understand her friend. "Well, when that captain started to suspect me, you didn't even listen to him. You stood up for me. It took me a split second to realize you'd believe him. I had no choice to suspect my mate of robbery. He's a cop. He's so confident in his theories. I'd have believed I'd organized the whole thing." The night passed without any adventures. Either the criminals were afraid of the police car near the entrance, or they were not going to do anything else today. In any case, the friends managed to get a good night's sleep after a hard day. The next morning, they decided to go to another bank to deposit the gold. Charlotte thought for a long time, but did not dare to call the captain to ask how things were going with the capture of the banker. She didn't want to distract the policeman from his business. Terry went straight to the window. "Charlotte, they've gone," she said excitedly. "Maybe they've caught them all and we're out of danger," Charlotte suggested timidly, glancing at the empty parking space by the driveway. "Well, let's get the bullion sorted out quickly, and then we'll call Morris." The friends packed up and walked down to the car. Terry drove very carefully, as if she was driving for the first time, and was afraid of hitting someone. "Can't you see there's no tail?" she asked Charlotte worriedly. "No, it's all right. Go on," Charlotte replied calmly, looking carefully through all the windows. But no sooner had the car left the courtyards and entered the main street than it was struck in the side by an old car. Two young men got out of it, approached Terry's car, and started pounding with their hands, demanding to open the door. "Stay where you are," Terry said loudly, checking that the car doors were locked. I'm sitting. Charlotte pulled out her phone and began frantically dialing the captain's phone number. At that moment, one police car and one civilian car pulled up to the scene of the accident. The post operatives who came out of there quickly rounded up the two assailants and placed them in the police car. One of the operatives was Captain Morris, who approached Terry's car. Terry didn't immediately realize that she had to open the door, but she let the policeman into the back seat. "Girls, I apologize for putting you through this, but there was no quicker or more efficient way to catch the accomplices red-handed." "So you mean to say that you sent us on purpose to give the gold to another bank?" Charlotte asked after a bit of shock. "I tell you, it was the quickest and most efficient way. We didn't have ironclad proof. We didn't. All those marvelous stories about grandfathers and the wily bankers sounded convincing, but not to the court. Now we've got it all ironclad. I reckon we'll give them a bit of a hard time and they'll give up their banker. Don't worry about the car. We'll sort it out. The main thing is that you're alive and well and all the criminals are caught. Well, almost all of them." "What do you mean? The banker hasn't been caught yet?" Terry was surprised. "In the next few hours, I think he'll be caught. So let's get in my car." I'll take you to your bank. The car will be examined by experts, then taken to the service car park. So I'll be your taxi driver today. Morris drove Charlotte and Terry to another bank, where Charlotte successfully deposited the bullion in a safe deposit box. The friends still hadn't recovered from the emergency shock, and so couldn't realize the extent of the danger the captain had put them in. Probably, if they had realized it, they would have communicated with Morris differently. On the way out of the bank, the cop's phone rang. "Hello, I'm listening." "Oh yeah? That's great. We'll be right there." Well, you'll never guess the names of today's attackers. "Was it Brown?" Charlotte asked in surprise. "Exactly, it's a family gang. The attackers are your banker's brother and nephew, who just ratted him out. We have information that Christopher Brown is on shift today, so I suggest we go right now to apprehend him." 10 minutes later, the captain's car with Charlotte and Terry was already outside the bank where Christopher Brown worked. Another police car was already parked in front of it, and the officers, along with the senior lieutenant, were waiting for a command from the captain. "You two," Morris looked at the officers, "go to the service entrance of the bank. The lieutenant and I will go in the front." The captain shifted, looking at Charlotte. "Would you like to come with us?" "Yes," Charlotte answered unexpectedly firmly. She wanted to look into the eyes of the criminal who had arranged such an adventure for her. Morris, the senior lieutenant, and Charlotte walked leisurely into the bank. The captain silently showed his ID to the bank employee standing at the entrance and made his way into the hall. At the farthest window sat Brown. He saw the operatives at first, but did not pay attention to them, probably because they were in civilian clothes. But when Charlotte came into his field of vision, Brown jumped up, looked round, and rushed towards the office. How quick! Morris grinned and headed for the office. It opened with a special card, so he asked the bank employee sitting at the next window to let them through. The captain took his time. He realized that his colleagues had probably already grabbed Brown on the way out. When the female employee opened the door, it turned out that this was indeed the case. In the bank's small employee lounge, Brown was sitting, with 2 security guards standing beside him. Apparently, the banker did not resist the arrest. "Why are you running, Mr. Brown? We wanted to talk to you, and you're running." The captain sat down in the chair opposite Brown. "I'm not telling you anything." "I want a lawyer," Brown hissed back. "You'll have a lawyer," Morris assured him, "but your relatives have already testified. Yesterday's call detail from your phone won't work in your favor either. In fact, we know all about motive." "So what's going on here?" A stately man in his 60s entered the office. "Operational activities," answered the captain. "And who are you actually?" "The bank manager," replied the man in a bass voice. "You are just in time, Mr. Manager. Your employee is suspected of organizing a theft and an attempt on a man's life." "What attempt on his life?" Brown was surprised. "What kind? And when a car deliberately crashes into another car, is that not an attempt?" the captain asked him. "What have they done?" The banker covered his face with his hands. "Or maybe your relatives made it up, and you had nothing to do with it?" "No," whispered Brown. "It was all my idea?" "Yes, you see, how marvelous. You're not even denying anything," Morris summarized. "Christopher, how could you? You've been one of the best employees in the business for so many years, not a single suspicion or reprimand. And now you've decided to take advantage of a client. I'll have your dismissal made retrospectively. I don't want our bank's name in any criminal reports." If it's any consolation, the captain said to the manager, Brown wasn't acting out of self-interest. He didn't want to profit from his customers. He was motivated by personal motives. But of course, to arrange such a thing because of some dispute from the past, yes, it does not justify him in any way. Comrade Senior Lieutenant asked the bank manager a few questions. The lieutenant left to talk to the manager. Only the captain, Charlotte, and the banker remained in the room. The sentries stood near the entrance. It was not just a dispute from the past, the banker began to say. It was a matter of honor, family honor. He looked at Charlotte intently. Your grandfather framed my grandfather and took away what was rightfully our family's." "What are you talking about?" "I know the story. My grandfather didn't set anyone up. Your grandfather ratted on him, which is why my grandfather went to jail." "Of course, who would tell you the truth?" "Listen to me. Your grandfather simply took the gold that my grandfather made. At first, mine managed to establish some justice and helped your grandfather to go to prison, but he did not return the gold. So when my grandfather came back to ask for his gold after he was released, your grandfather set him up, faked an attack on himself, wrote something to the police, and that was it. By that time, my grandfather worked almost all the time at distant mines and mine sites, and his health was badly shaken. Of course, he couldn't stand the prison term and died. And then I saw your surname, saw the gold, clarified the personal data of your grandmother, and everything became clear to me at once. I called my brother, and we hatched a plan to get the gold from your flat. I gave him and my nephew the address. They drove there and waited for you. You won't believe this, but they witnessed the attack on you. So the two men who approached me during the attack were your relatives?" Charlotte wondered. "Apparently, yes, that's what they told me. Then my brother and nephews waited for you to leave home and started looking for gold. They didn't find it. We realized that the day after it happened, you would definitely go to another bank to deposit the gold. So we decided to go as radical as possible. They weren't supposed to hit you. I'm sure it was an accident. The plan was simply to stop the car and ask for the gold. Asking well thought out, I'll give you that. We didn't want to put your life in danger, but your family's honor." "Uniforms," the captain shouted. "Take this one down to the station." The cops led Brown away, and the captain and Charlotte walked out the service entrance and stopped. "Wait, I don't understand. Who was the first attacker who tried to take my purse from my doorstep?" "Just a robber," Morris answered. "Coincidence? It would have been a surprise if he'd been able to snatch your purse and seen the gold in it." "Yeah, so the people who rescued me were going to rip me off." Charlotte sighed heavily, "And there's more to the story. Why should I believe him over my grandmother?" "You don't have to believe anything." The captain reassured Charlotte, "Both versions have a right to exist." "But if Brown sincerely believed that my grandfather framed his grandfather, then his reaction is understandable. There are plenty of mitigating circumstances in this case: personal motive, recklessness, and the fact that he saved you from the first robber. But still, they committed a crime, and they'll get the punishment they deserve. I don't think they'll be in jail for very long, but a couple of years for sure. Well, we'll see what the court decides. All right, Terry, I think we're expected back there." It's been a while since then. The court took into account all mitigating circumstances and sentenced the banker and his brother and nephew to 1.5 years in a penal colony. After the trial, Charlotte decided to go to the bank again, only to the bank where she had deposited the gold. After leaving the bank, Charlotte called Terry and offered to meet her at her house. An hour later, the friends were sitting on the sofa in the living room, drinking tea. "Well, I reread Grandma's letter and thought it over. Indeed, it was dangerous to own gold, so I decided to get rid of it." What? Terry was surprised. "You sold the bullion?" "Yes." Charlotte stood up, went to her bag and pulled out a puffy envelope. "This is for you." For me, Terry took the envelope in her hands and pulled out a wad of notes. You. Let's just say it's for car repairs. But the insurance pretty much covered it. So it's just for moral damages. You've suffered so much because of me. I can't imagine how you felt when you suffered so much because of my problems. Come on, mate, it's an adventure. My life is home, work, home, work, home, work, home, work, and this is some variety. You feel needed, don't you? I haven't felt as much emotion in the last 5 years as I did that day. So how could I refuse to help you? You couldn't. I didn't even think you could say no at the time. So I'm asking you to take this envelope. Consider it another personal favor." "Ah, thank you." Terry carefully put the envelope into her bag, and the rest of it, have you finally thought of where to spend it? she asked and laughed. Yes, this time, yes, Charlotte replied, smiling. You've been thinking for a long time, so where to go, really into property. I've heard that the market is down now and you have to act fast. No, not property, Charlotte said calmly. But in shares, well, you're kidding. I don't know anything about them, but you've always been a smart girl. And not in stocks. Then where? You see, this money, this gold has really very controversial origin. Of course, I believe every word of my grandmother, but some of the information she may not know. That's why I didn't dare to spend the money just to enrich myself. There is a fund called Singing Hearts. It helps sick children. It seemed right to me to send the rest of the money there. I live alone, I have a salary and a flat. And they need the money badly. I think this will be the best final chord in the half-century-long dispute between the two families.